Hi friends, I'm Kyla and welcome back to the Infinite Library, and today we are here with the maximum spook factor because in this video I'm going to be reading every single one of the Goodreads Choice Awards 2025 books in the horror category. It's been a bit of an undertaking. I've been doing on this project for a couple of months now. I've tried to pre-read before the nominations came out, as many as I could, and then of course when the awards actually did come out, some of my predictions were wrong. You can see my predictions video here in case you're curious. But yeah, there were a couple of wild cards I wasn't expecting, so I had to scramble to get some of them. So if all has gone well, you will be seeing this video just before the winners of the Goodreads Choice Awards are announced. If I've taken too long to read those extra books, maybe a little bit afterwards. I'm beginning to suspect maybe afterwards at the moment, because we are 2 weeks, as I'm filming this intro, to the Goodreads Awards winners being announced. And I still have 9 books to read. So that's how that's been going. But yeah, that is what we're doing in this video. Additionally, I am going to do a follow-up video because some of the books I read then didn't make it into the Goodreads Choice Awards. And I've already read them and I've already filmed my reviews of them. So you're actually going to see, probably sometime in December, a follow-up, hopefully much shorter video of reading some of the books that didn't actually make it in. So basically other 2025 horror releases. So this is what we're doing in this video. We're reading all 20 books in the horror category. I'm going to keep it as breezy as I can. You're not going to see much in the way of B-roll in this. It is literally just going to be me reviewing the books, pretty much. And maybe some of my like midway reading thoughts if I think they're worth sharing with you of my experience reading the books. So before we get into it, I should actually talk to you about what all the books are that are in the awards. I will actually give a more detailed summary whilst I'm reviewing, but I will just very briefly just go through the books, give you the vibes of them and my initial, like, what I'm kind of expecting to think of the book, I suppose. I don't have all of these physically. Some of them are books that have already gone back to the library, or they're books I've primarily done through audiobook or ebook. So again, don't have them physically, but I do have quite a lot of them physically. So let's go through the ones I don't have physically first. The first book is When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy. I've never actually read Nat Cassidy before. I don't believe they've been in the Goodreads Awards before, but his previous books I've been hearing really good things about. So he's kind of been on my radar for a little while. I know this book in particular has been getting a lot of hype this year, so I was not surprised to see it in here. It's also one of my potentials for definitely being in top 10. I think it could win, but there are some other books in here that I just think based on popularity are going to clinch that win. But I think it's going to give it a run for its money. As far as I know, this book is about a struggling actress who ends up like finding a little boy, and then the father is like a werewolf or something and is after them, and that is the book basically. I've heard really good things about it, so I'm excited to get to that one. Next we have Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. I've actually read from Kat Dunn before. I read Bitterthorn a few years back, which is a sapphic fairy tale, and I really loved it. So going into this one with high hopes. It is a sapphic Carmilla retelling, historical as well. I love me a retelling, I love me Carmilla, so really kind of excited for this one, and I like Kat Dunn's writing, so I'm hoping this one will be a winner. Funnily enough, I also did actually go to a book event near the start of this year for the release of this book with the author, and for the release of Lucy Rose's The Lamb, which you may also see in this video later. Next we have the kind of the wild card that I did not even predict at all was going to be in here. I had heard of this book, but only because I had it as a library ARC from Libro FM. I've heard no one talking about this book, but it is The Haunting of Paynes Hollow by Kelly Armstrong. I have heard of the author before. I think she wrote some of the Buffy books back in the day, but if it's the right person. But yeah, literally never heard of her otherwise. Haven't heard anyone talk about this book. So a wild card for sure. I guess it's a haunted house kind of thing, is the vibe I get from it. Next, we have Sylvia Moreno Garcia's new book, The Bewitching, one that I forgot was coming out when I did my predictions, but thankfully Tiff at Tiff Reads Books got me with that one. She got me, and I realized that one was later that was coming out. She's always done really well in these awards. Mexican Gothic won, and I think that was her debut, Mexican Gothic, and that actually won the awards a few years back now. I think she had a book either last year or the year before, or possibly, which did pretty well. So I'm expecting this book to do well. It's going to be historical, Mexican, probably Gothic horror. That's kind of what she does. Then we have Chuck Tingle's latest book, Lucky Day. This was one that I thought could have possibly been in the sci-fi category, to be honest. I got more sci-fi vibes from it than horror. But I think because his previous books that have come out were horror, I think that's why it kind of got a little bit more put into that category. As far as I know, this is about a series of unusual events that happen that are based around luck, and they go to a casino to try and find the cause of it. That's all I know about this. I really enjoyed Bury Your Gaze last year by Chuck Tingle, so hoping I will really like this one too. And of course, the one that is probably going to win, we have the new Stephen King book, Never Flinch. This is the 4th book, I want to say, in the Holly Gibney series. I'm not crazy on this series, to be honest. I do really like Stephen King, but this series has not been for me. If you have watched my previous videos, you'll know that I actually read Holly back when I was reading books from the 2023 Goodreads Awards, and I hated it. So I'm not going in with very good expectations to this book. It's more like crime mystery, to be honest, than horror, and I suspect that is what Never Flinch is going to be like too. I know it's following like 2 different serial killers, and there's a whole political aspect to it, and Holly is a bodyguard for some of it. Holly is the lead detective of this like private detective agency basically. But yeah, I'm not looking forward to reading this. I kind of regretted my choice to try and read all the horror books when I realised this book was going to be in it, but I'm committed to the bit, so we're reading it anyway. Then finally, I believe all the books I do not have on my person at this time is Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zheng by Kylie Lee Baker, who is mostly a YA fantasy author before this, but she's slipping into the horror genre, which is nice to see. I've already read this book. I believe I read this for a Treasure or Trash episode that when my friend picked my books for me. And I had mixed feelings about this one. I will briefly go over my thoughts for it again. If you want to see more detailed thoughts, please check out this video. But yeah, this is an Asian horror set during the pandemic, very much centering around the fact that about how the Chinese people, Asian people even, were kind of victimized during the pandemic. Our main character is a crime scene cleaner, and they begin to notice that Asian women are turning up dead very frequently, and then they are also being haunted. So yeah, there's a whole like mystery kind of thing going on in that, and yeah, it was one that I thought was really good. Didn't quite work for me, but you'll see my thoughts in the review. And that's it for the ones that I do not own physically. Let's go through this big pile here of what I do have. So I wasn't kidding when I said I have a massive pile here. I'm gonna put it down before I fall over. Whew. But yeah, let's go through these very briefly. So of course, we have the new Grady Hendrix book, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. I've had a checkered history with Grady Hendrix. I either love or I really don't like his books. It's a historical one set in, I think, the 60s or the 70s, about girls who have become pregnant going to a home for pregnant girls and discovering witchcraft. So yeah, this is also one of the few that I read earlier in the year, because I read this back in February or March, I believe, when it first came out, to go to a Grady Hendrix author event. So that one is also probably the only one I think that could give Stephen King a run for his money. Also The Bewitching, to be fair, by Sylvia Moreno Garcia, because she has one before. Then we have one that I don't think is going to work for a lot of people. I'm excited to read this, but I also have trepidation, shall we say. This is You Weren't Meant to Be Human by Andrew Joseph White. I know them as a queer YA horror writer. I've read some of their YA horror and I really enjoy it. They do a lot of body horror and stuff about religion. And this is their first adult horror. And it is about, there's definitely some sort of cult vibes going on in this book. And our main character is a trans man who gets pregnant. And I think that aspect is what is making me a little bit worried because I'm not sure how it's going to get handled. It's not really a subject matter I enjoy in books, so we'll see. But I do like this author, so I'm hopeful. Then we have the unexpected sequel to Bunny by Mona Awad, which came out this year. We Love You, Bunny. I have not been hearing very much about this, to be honest. I suspect people haven't been liking it, but I really loved Bunny, so I have hopes I will enjoy it. It is really long as well. It's much longer than Bunny. So yeah, we'll see. Bunny was like this psychological dark academia. Less horror than psychological, but I really, really enjoyed it. So yeah, we'll see what the sequel has in store. Then one that I did not predict at all and didn't even know was existed is Coffin Moon by Keith Rawson. I only just realised that this skull here has nice little fangs. So I guess it's a vampire story. It's set in the winter of 1975. About someone who comes home after a tour in Vietnam, then a vampire walks into his bar and ruins his life. It definitely gives the nostalgia vibes. This feels like an old style horror book. The road makes me think we're going on like a road trip horror, basically, which I'm kind of down for, to be honest. Then we have another Asian author. Also, you'll see a theme of cannibalism in some of these books. Female raging cannibalism seem to be some of the themes, but we have What Hunger by Catherine Dang. I think this is either their debut. No, this is their second book. They also came out with this book called Nice Girls. This is about a Vietnamese American girl who, after a tragedy, starts to crave human flesh. It's on the shorter side, and yeah, I've heard good things about it. Then we have the other book that I mentioned earlier, The Lamb by Lucy Rose. Enjoy my little finger bookmark that I got at the event. Really surprised that I didn't see this in the debut category, to be honest, because I really thought it would be there. But yeah, this is one I'm very excited about. One of my friends, who you may see later in this video, really, really enjoyed this one. This is a contemporary folk horror about a mother and child who eat people in the woods, basically. And then a woman comes along and gets involved in their life. And I don't know where it goes from there, but I'm excited. Something I forgot to mention, sorry, by the way, you should also be hearing from two guest reviewers in this video that I have asked specifically to come and talk about some of these books, because I either think they are better placed or they really, really love the book. So I just asked them if they wanted to come in and talk about the book. I will still read the books, but I thought it would be nice for you to hear their thoughts on it as well. Then we have Ling Huang's new book. I think it was Natural Beauty she came out with either last year or the previous year. This one is Immaculate Conception. One I really thought I was going to see in the sci-fi category, to be honest, rather than the horror, but it's in horror. This is about, I believe, two artists. One is kind of obsessed with the other, and then there is some sort of technology that allows the obsessive one to like be in her mind or something. So that's what this is. Another one that I really did not expect to see in here is Breathe In, Bleed Out by Brian Macaulay. The cover gives such retro horror vibes. This one is about a woman called Hannah who has been running from demons and ends up, I guess, at she ends up at like a spiritual retreat, but there's something strange about the guru there, and there is like a serial killer. So this definitely gives like 80s horror vibes. So that's what I'm kind of hoping for it. Speaking of, it even says "Don't Kill My Vibe" on the back, which is quite funny. So yeah, I'm hoping this one will be quite fun, rather than like gruesome and grotesque and gnarly is more what I'm hoping for, but I guess we'll see. Right, the last four now, we have Blood on Her Tongue by Joanna Van Veen. This is the author of... what is it the author of? I've forgotten. My Darling Dreadful Thing, which I think was in the horror category whatever year it came out. This is another historical vampire book. And yeah, I've heard really good things about it, so hoping this is going to be one of the ones that I really enjoy. Probably will make it into the top 10. Then we have the new Darcy Coates book. This one threw me because I thought Darcy Coates was a mystery thriller writer. I didn't know they wrote horror, so I was not expecting this to be in here, but it is. So this is how bad things can get. It is about an online influencer and several hundred of his most loyal fans are on an island, and then something weird happens on the island, basically. I think it's going to be quite a quick read, to be honest. So I think it'll be fun and quick, and that's kind of what I'm expecting from this. Second to last, we have The Possession of Alba by Isabel Cañas. She writes historical Mexican horror, much like Sylvia Marina Garcia, but with her stuff is kind of usually rooted in romance as well. I've heard really good things about this author, so I'm very excited to get to this. It is about, as you would expect, a woman being possessed. Interested because I rarely see romance done well, I think, in horror, and I'm not really a big romance fan, so interesting to see this one. And then finally, last but not least, we have the new Rachel Harrison book, Play Nice. Rachel Harrison is very much known for more campy horror, so that's kind of what I'm expecting from this. It's a haunted house book. That's all I really know about it, but I love the cover. I think it's iconic, and I have been hearing good things about it. So that is all 20 of the books. I guess I better get reading, and you'll see from me soon what I think about it. So I am going to pick up one of the longer books, and that is going to be one of the books that I probably have the lowest expectations for, to be honest. Unintentionally matching the colours here very nicely, but it is the new Stephen King book, Never Flinch. This is actually the fourth book in a series. It's the Holly Gibney series, and it's one of those I kind of argue is not really much of a horror. It's much more of a thriller. We're kind of following a private detective who's called Holly Gibney in this series throughout various things that are happening, and sometimes they are a little bit supernatural, but I would argue in at least the case of one of the books, which you can see my review of here, I don't think they're necessarily in the horror spectrum that much, unless you kind of see it as the horror spectrum being that Silence of the Lambs kind of thing where nothing supernatural is happening, but it's the horrors of what people do, and it's more than just a mystery thriller. But yeah, I unfortunately am not really a fan of this series. I've mostly read the first book in the series, which is The Outsider, and wasn't crazy on it. It was too much of a police procedural for a lot of it to me really enjoy it. If It Bleeds was a novella, which was okay. I didn't mind that one too much, probably because it was short. And I really didn't like Holly, which is the book before this one, for a variety of reasons. I didn't think it was particularly menacing, which for Stephen King is not great, and I didn't enjoy anything to do with the antagonists in that and the reasons for why they were doing what they were doing. And I also just don't really think Holly is a great character. I'm probably the minority here. So I'm not really going in this with very high expectations for this book. I actually said I wasn't going to read another book in this series. After I finished The Outsider, I was like, that's it, I'm done with this series. But we know this is going to be in the horror awards, so I'm committed to reading it. It's like 400 pages, so on the longer side. But at the very least, I do like Stephen King's writing, so at least I know I'm not going to have a bad time in terms of that. I'm just not convinced I'm going to like the plot or the characters all that much. And this one in particular very much just feels very, once again, kind of crime thrillery. I'll read you the premise. So, when the Buckeye City Police Department receives a disturbing letter from a person threatening to kill 13 innocent and 1 guilty to atone for the needless death of an innocent man, Detective Izzy James has no idea what to think. Are 14 citizens about to be slaughtered in an unhinged act of retribution? As the investigation unfolds, Izzy realizes that the letter writer is deadly serious, and she turns to her friend Holly Gibney for help. Meanwhile, controversial and outspoken women's rights activist Kate McKay is embarking on a multi-state lecture tour, drawing packed venues of both fans and detractors. Someone who vehemently opposes Kate's message of female empowerment has been targeting her and disrupting her events. At first, no one was hurt, but the stalker is growing bolder, and Holly is hired to be Kate's bodyguard, a challenging task with a headstrong employer and a determined adversary driven by wrath and unhinged righteousness. featuring a riveting cast of characters both old and new, including world-famous gospel singer Sister Bessie and an unforgettable villain addicted to murder. These twin narratives converge in a chilling and spectacular conclusion. A feat of storytelling only Stephen King could pull off. So, if I had read that premise and hadn't known it was Stephen King, like if I just seen this in a bookshop, I wouldn't have picked this up. I have zero interest, unfortunately, in the plot of this book. I'm hoping it will interest me, but nothing about what this book is telling me it's about is drawing me in. It's very political sounding. It's put in the real world, which I don't always enjoy in horror. I like a little bit of we're pulling you out of the real world in horror, I suppose. And again, this feels like it's just going to kind of be a detective procedural, which I don't enjoy. So, yeah, not going into this with great expectations, but maybe that means I may actually enjoy it because I'm going in with my expectations in the gutter. We'll see, I guess. So, I finished Never Flinch, and there was nothing horror about this. This really, I think, should be in the mystery thriller category. This is just a pure crime book. It definitely deals with, as some of Stephen King's books do deal with in the past, as, for example, Robert Harris with the Hannibal Lecter series. The people that are behind the crimes in this both are dealing with mental illnesses, and I don't enjoy that being the cause for them being criminals, to be honest. And overall, I didn't like this. I think going in with as low expectations as I did, I would say that at least Holly felt a little bit more focused in terms of its storyline, but this also does a whole thing where it deviates a lot and has all these side stories going on. Everything to do with the singer and Barbara felt very not connected to the main plot. They kind of like made it come into the main plot towards the end, but really all that didn't need to be there. All the stuff with the game, there's like a game that happened during this that is building throughout the book between the firemen and the policemen, a charity game that the lead detective on the case is kind of being forced to do alongside also trying to find the murderer. And whilst I guess realistic, also just took up way too much time. This book was way too long, like 400 pages. And although I like the idea of there being two different criminals with two different agendas that end up kind of coming together through how the story goes, I did just kind of find it confusing, not gonna lie. It's just two white guys killing people, basically, and I just don't think it was particularly original in how it all came together. And I was definitely like, because I just didn't care that much, I was starting to get them mixed up a little bit. Like I said, they're both just white guys. And again, it's a shame that we're seeing, much like how we were seeing minorities being the victims in Holly, which I really didn't enjoy. We're seeing two men who are mentally ill as the perpetrators of these crimes, essentially. I really didn't like what they did with one of them, in particular to do with them feeling gender incongruous. And although the way they thought about it was at least not homophobic, I feel like it was just a choice that Stephen King made in what he did with these two people. And overall, I just didn't find this to be really that interesting at all. I was bored throughout the whole thing, even when we're getting to the latter part of it and the stakes are really high and we're literally going in like 15-minute time increments with events happening. I didn't care. And every time I was just kind of glossing over it a little bit, which is not what you want to do. The writing is mostly fine. I will say that Stephen King does know how to write. There were definitely some good lines. There was some choice of words at times I didn't really enjoy. And once again, some of those choice of words were to do with our main protagonist, Holly, and I found it to be a little bit disappointing because, like, I'm not really Holly's biggest fan anyway. I just don't find it to be very interesting. She is a character that struggles with self-esteem, and I like seeing that be something that she struggles with throughout this, particularly given that she starts to get involved in these high-profile roles. She's actually a bodyguard at one point, which is really not something that works well with how she works. I liked her seeing doing those challenges, but then every single time we see some sort of description of her by someone else, even from herself, they're just saying, oh, she's tired looking, she's aged, she's very grey, she's dim. And I thought that was just kind of disappointing, especially when you compare it to the other older woman who was in this book, which is Sister Bessie, who was very much seen as this, like, vibrant character, pretty much. And it feels a bit of a shame that the main protagonist, Holly, is being constantly dulled down like this. Like, we know she's smart, and we know that she can get the job done. Do you have to keep pointing out that she's getting older? I don't know, it just felt a little bit tired. Like, once, maybe that's fine, but it kept getting mentioned over and over, and I just found that to be very frustrating. Again, there were some other choice words that I didn't think were particularly well used throughout this book, and I do put that down to this being an older white man. I think Stephen King was at least trying to get things somewhat up to date in this. He talks about certain things and bans and that kind of thing, which is more modern day, but this almost does feel like it could have taken place in the exact same timeline as Holly, to be honest. And yeah, I just don't think the Holly books are that interesting, to be honest. And yes, I would definitely argue this shouldn't be in the horror category. I don't think there was anything in this that really put it in the horror category. Yes, there were supernatural aspects in previous books, but there wasn't in this one, much like in Holly. Still arguing that I just don't think this is a horror. This should be a crime mystery. This is pure crime book. And also, like, I'm coming at it from the perspective of I don't really enjoy those kinds of books. So I can appreciate that some of the writing is okay, but I'm never really going to appreciate this book because it's just not my type of thing. If I was someone that really enjoyed crime books, maybe I would have enjoyed this more, but this is just not my cup of tea. I have to give it a low rating because I was bored throughout, I was frustrated throughout. Probably not as much as Holly, I would say. I think Holly made me angry. This didn't really make me angry, I just bored. And there really is no bigger crime than a book that bores you, particular book that's supposed to be in the horror category. So yeah, I think I'm giving this a 2.75. It's really probably more of a 2.5, but I do think some of the writing was fine. I do think it was readable, at least if this is your genre. If it's not your genre, then I think you probably will find it very boring. I did like that Stephen King at the end does talk about how he's trying to take his political stance in this book, which he has done in previous Holly books as well. And in this case, it's to do with women's choice. And I like how he made that a big focus in this book, and it was dealt with not in a clear black or white manner. It was dealt with very much in the grey because we're following this political person called Kate, who is a big pro-choice speaker. She's very political, and in that she has her share of both haters and fans. And I like that she was portrayed not necessarily positively, but also not negatively, and I like the shades of grey and the complexity with that character. Still didn't really enjoy her, but like she was very human throughout it all. A couple of things that I appreciate this book was trying to do, but ultimately this one wasn't for me. I just found it to be really tiring. Every time this thing that the title was related to as well kept coming up, I just kept rolling my eyes, unfortunately. And yeah, just really not for me. I know I said it before when I picked up the Holly book that I wasn't ever going to read another book in this series, and I had to do it because I was determined to read the Horror Book Awards this year, but really now I am not reading anymore. In the Holly Gibney series, I will continue to read Stephen King because I do like his books, but I definitely prefer his outright horror books to his more mystery thriller books, I think, which this really is. And for me, this type of writing of his is not for me. I am not the right audience for this, and it just didn't work for me. So yeah, a miss, and one that I definitely kind of feel like I wasted my time with, but we're moving on to better books now, hopefully, and ones that I think will actually be horror. So, very in keeping with my colour scheme right now, I do need to tell you about one of the 2 horror books that I have already read this year. There was a lot of them that I hadn't read this year, but there were 2 of them that I had read, and this is one of them, which is Grady Hendrix's new book, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. And I went into this with a lot of trepidation, I would say, because for me, Grady Hendrix is a hit or a miss author, I find. I've read quite a few of his books at this point, and they don't always work for me. When I heard that the premise for this one, which is, it's a historical book set in the 1970s, and we are following this girl, this 15-year-old girl called Fern, who is pregnant, and she gets sent to this house in Florida called Wellwood House, which is basically where a whole bunch of unwed teenage girls who have gotten themselves pregnant are sent to basically have the baby, and then the baby gets taken away and adopted, and then they get to go back to their lives as if nothing ever happened. This was a thing, I believe, at the time, but it very much plays into the horror of them being in this isolated place and all of their agency taken away from them. And I was just a little bit squicky about the idea of this involving pregnancy in horror. It's not really something that I particularly like to read about, to be honest. So I was worried that this was going to be kind of pushing on into a aspect of horror that I didn't like. But actually, I really enjoyed this. So the whole thing obviously is about them being sent to this house for wayward girls, and all the agency is taken away, but then they begin to claim that agency back through learning witchcraft and through starting to change the world around them through their sisterhood coven, through spells that they perform together. And I really love the quartet of girls in this book. And I will say, having read some of Grady Hendrix's other books, I think he writes teenagers really well. And I thought this was so believable with the characters in this. I thought they were all really interesting. And yeah, I got really invested in this emotionally. I really felt for these girls. I actually listened to this via the audiobook, and I thought the audiobook was a really good way to listen to it as well. And Grady himself is very passionate about all things horror, as you know, and I did actually go and see him for his one-man show, which was all about the history of witchcraft, which very well done, really, given the subject matter of this. And yeah, I was just kind of relieved when I read this because I just didn't know if it was gonna be the type of horror that would work for me, and I think it really does. It's quite on the long side as well for a horror book. This is one of his longer books, I think. We are almost 500 pages, not quite, but almost 500 pages. And yeah, I just thought it was really well done. It's not my favorite Grady Hendrix book. It hasn't taken that spot, but I think this is actually my second favorite Grady Hendrix book now. Because for me, the ratings go that at the very bottom, we have Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. Then we have How to Sell a Haunted House, which was just kind of okay. I didn't think it was that good. Then Final Girl Support Group, which I really enjoy, but I'm also a horror movie nerd, so for me it really worked for me because I like that type of horror. Then it's going to be this one, and then at the very top it's My Best Friend's Exorcism, which again, teenage girl horror. And I just think he does them so well. I think he writes the characters so well for that particular type of horror to make them believable, rather than what a lot of, if you have white male authors writing young girls, doesn't always turn out that well. But I think he does a really good job of it. So yeah, for me, I thought this was really good. I was really happy that I enjoyed this book as much as I did. It wasn't quite a 5-star for me. I think it was very close to a 5-star though. I think I was bordering around the 4.75 mark for it. It just didn't quite hit it, I don't think, in terms of the conclusion and how things kind of tied up. But I really, really had a good time with this. And I feel like it did what a lot of horror books I want to do for me, but often kind of miss the mark, and that's what ends up putting them back into that 3-star category for me, is that it emotionally resonated with me. And not a lot of horror always does that, to be honest, especially when it's just kind of going for the cheap thrills and the scare factor. But I thought that this had a lot of heart to it, a lot of thought and research put behind it, and it's just really well done, I think. So that is my review of Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. It's perhaps not the most extensive review because I read this back in like February, I think now, and it is now October. So I remember the feeling of reading this quite well, but I'm a little hazy in the plot elements. Definitely one that I would actually recommend to people, particularly with the audiobook. So another book that I actually don't have physically anymore, but it is one that I read earlier this year, is Bat Eater by Kylie Lee Baker. So I actually got the Evernight edition for this and ended up reading it. Funnily enough, it was picked for me to read by my friend Jules from Jules Gem Hearts on BookTube for my Treasure or Trash episode 3. And surprised because she's not a horror reader, so I thought it was quite funny that she ended up picking that for me. But yeah, I read that back in April, it was now, and for me, I thought it was very good. Like, I can very much see all the love that people have for this. I think it is justifiably in these awards. I would love it to be in the top 10. I wouldn't even be mad, honestly, if it won. Although there are other books that I think, for me personally, are perhaps better, but I thought this was a really gorgeously written political horror. Basically, this book is about this girl called Cora. It's set during the COVID pandemic, but in America, and she is a Chinese American, and her half-sister is killed in front of her by, presumably, what she believes, by a man who calls her Bat Eater, which, if you know all the Asian stereotypes around that time, was one of the racial slurs that was basically said to the Chinese people at the time. And pushed in front of a train, and that happens at the very start of the book. And so for her, the most horrific thing she could ever see has already happened. So she decides, when she's unemployed, she is going to become a crime scene cleaner because nothing is going to be worse than that. And she's very OCD, so it is actually good for her to be cleaning. So she's kind of just naturally suited to the job. So it's her and 2 other people, all from an Asian company, and they start to see this pattern of Asian women being brutally murdered, and it seems like there is someone out there who is targeting these Asian women. But at the same time, we are hitting what I believe is the anniversary of her sister's, Delilah's, death, and it goes into family traditions here and how Cora, being an American Chinese, someone who hasn't even really been to China, I don't believe, doesn't really feel that heritage as much as other people. So she doesn't kind of necessarily believe or practice the traditions around ghosts and honouring the dead. So she hasn't necessarily been doing this for her sister. And so then when a ghost starts to haunt her, she thinks it is her sister who is coming for her, basically. And I thought this was beautifully written. I really enjoyed it. Overall, I think for me, it lost a little bit towards the end in terms of the emotional impact. I thought it started off really strong. I really enjoyed the other characters that were brought into it, but things with those characters didn't necessarily develop in a way that I thought really made them resonate, which is unfortunate. I really did enjoy Cora as a character. This book also really kind of echoes back to me to another book that came out last year, which was The Eyes Are the Best Part. I did enjoy that book a little bit more, unfortunately, but I think for me, Although I really love what this book is doing, I think it does some really important things. I think it says some really important things, as well as also being really scary. I just, for me, tonally, didn't really gel with this book. I found it to be very depressing throughout in tone, which justifiable given the events that are happening. But for me, that took away from the emotion and me being invested in the story a little bit, because I found it to be so depressing in tone. And whilst I'm really glad I read this book, I just didn't think it was ever going to be a book I would reach for again, because I think the tone is so somber. So for me, I gave this, I think I gave it a 4.25 or a 4.5, which usually would be a book I would keep. I thought it was beautifully written. I thought it did some really good things. But for me, the tone just wasn't quite there. This is a very personal thing for me. Depression is something I struggle with, and I don't particularly feel good in my free time for leisure purposes read books that go that deeply into depression. When I'm in the right mindset for it, yes, but that wasn't what I was expecting from this book, so it just didn't really work for me in that kind of way. But yeah, overall I thought it was really good, and it is one I really hope to see in these awards. I've seen a lot of people talking about it, and I do hope it's going to do well. So those are my thoughts on Bat Eater. But I will say that if you want to hear a little bit more in depth and in the moment of my thoughts when I was reading it, because this was back in April, please check out that video of me reading If Treasure or Trash, because I go in a lot more in depth there, I think. So just to update, because I have started Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. This is actually also my book club book for the month of October, because we always pick something spooky and horror for October, and this is what people picked. It is a Carmilla retelling, and I'm not very far in. I'm like 45 pages. This is so easy to read so far. It probably helps with being in first person, but because this is like a gothic historical book, I was kind of expecting it to be a little bit less easy to read, but it is so easy. I am flying through this already. We're currently mostly just following our main girl here, Lenore, who is a very like kind of typical high society life. There is so much focus at the moment on aesthetic. Everything she looks around is judged on its appearance, on her having the latest thing. So she's coming across as a little bit shallow, I suppose, but also like her husband, who they do appear to have kind of a loveless marriage, even though she does love him. And she is motherless still at this point in time, which I suppose she sees as like a bit of a disgrace. But her husband kind of prides her in not having these like womanly emotions and being quite unshakable, I suppose. And we've just met Carmilla at the moment, so I'm not very far in, but I am liking it so far, even though I feel like it's an interesting commentary at the moment with our main character Lenore and her being this kind of typical unflappable sort of mistress of the house so far. Okay, weird take, but why is Carmilla kind of boring in this book? She's just kind of lying around and telling the main character that she can do better, which valid, she can, but also she's not really doing anything. And I also don't really get like her whole seductive thing in this book. I'm not feeling it. I don't think the main character's feeling it either, to be honest. She feels this weird magnetism towards her, but also she hates her and wants her out the house. So very weird vibes from this so far, but I really don't like Carmilla as a character at the moment. She just has nothing to her, really. Okay, here are my thoughts on Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. I literally finished this about 10 minutes ago, but I pretty much already had an idea of my review for this book, and nothing really about the final parts of this has changed my mind, so I have been kind of ruminating over this for a couple of days now. So, fun fact with this one, it's actually one of the few horror books I already had on my physical TBR. I went to an author event earlier this year in Manchester with both Kat Dunn for the release of Hungerstone and with Lucy Rose for the release of The Lamb. And I initially had gone purely for this because I had read Kat Dunn before with Bitterthorn, and I really loved Bitterthorn. It's like this dark sapphic fairy tale, and I really enjoyed that. So I was really looking forward to this. And the thing is, on paper, this book should have been everything that worked for me. So basically this book is a retelling of Carmilla, which, if you know me, I love my sapphics, I love my vampires, I love retellings. And the story itself sounded interesting, and the vibes I got from it were also quite interesting from going to the event. I know there is an awful lot of discussion and meditation around hunger, around women's appetites, around women's autonomy, about what they can and cannot do in the historical time period this is set in. Actually set in Sheffield, which is kind of interesting. So many like historical time periods are set in places I don't know very well, but it was interesting to see one in Sheffield. And as a such, industrialization and the steel making industry does have a big part in this book, because that is in fact what our main character Lenore's husband does. He kind of runs this steel factory industry there, and he is not exactly the best runner of these industries. He is very negligent in terms of his workers, and also, as we find out, very negligent in terms of looking after his wife. So we follow in this book Lenore, who is a lady who was orphaned at a young age in a horrific accident. She grew up very Miss Havisham style with an aunt, and very much had no one who she could rely on, no one who cared for her. But she was able to like fashion this marriage essentially with this guy, and has kind of made herself to be the perfect wife, because he is kind of from new money and not really accepted in higher esteemed circles in society, whereas she has come from heritage, even if she doesn't have very much money herself, and so she is able to basically give him that society that he needs to make him become popular. So that's kind of their marriage, and as we start this off, it feels very much like she is completely in control of what she is doing. She very much does come across as a woman in control at the beginning of this book, but the cracks start to come in very early, and you begin to realise that she is doing everything for the sake of others, and there is nothing really that she is expressing in herself. So that is clearly a big theme in this book. Sadly, I wasn't a big fan of this book. I'm really sad, because I did enjoy Kat Dunn's other book that I read. I would definitely still read Kat Dunn. I think for me personally, this did not work for me. I found this to be a very kind of tiring read, to be honest. The writing itself was fine. It was very readable. It was all in the first person, told from Lenore's point of view, and that made it quick to read, because I found the reading itself to be very easy. But I wasn't really that invested in what was going on, unfortunately. And I was just finding the situation quite tiring very fast. And we do kind of come to a change of circumstances, shall we say, by the end of this book. And things are discovered, things are revealed. But I don't think it did it very well, I have to say. In the back of the book, Kat Dunn herself talks about how she wrote this book after a great deal of anger and confusion, and I kind of get that vibe from this book, unfortunately. I also have to say, for a Carmilla retelling, Carmilla was kind of the most boring character in this whole book. I mean, every character in this book was not particularly likable anyway. Lenore, even as someone who you kind of want to root for kind of coming to her true self through the course of the book. You know, we're all about righting women's wrongs, that kind of thing. But I didn't really like her that much either. I found her to be very frustrating, I think, because it felt like it took her so long to do anything, because she was so numb, because she was so confused, which I understand. But I did find that frustrating, but also understandable. But Lenore, as the person who is kind of the catalyst for her becoming who she is, I just found her the most boring character ever. There was really nothing to her. There was no characterization, no backstory for her really, other than just she's this woman who's kind of seducing Lenore and being provocative for the sake of being provocative, and just kind of keep saying to Lenore, look how shit your life is! Look how shit it is! Isn't it crap? aren't you going to do something about it? And that was kind of her whole role in this. I figured she was such a boring character, which was a shame because I maybe wasn't expecting there to be a romance in this, and it wasn't really a romance at all. But I just didn't get anything from her as a character. And with a Carmilla retelling, I feel like if Carmilla flops, not good for the rest of the story. So yeah, it does kind of go into some little horror things throughout with there are various people who are experiencing unnatural hunger that you see throughout this. None of it was really explored. It almost felt like it was kind of metaphorical or was potentially the supernatural effects of Carmilla being around because her role, I guess, is to bring out hunger in people, but it wasn't really ever made into anything particularly. I just didn't really enjoy this book that much, unfortunately. I didn't mind the ending. I sort of wish we'd seen a little bit more about where it could have gone after the ending, but I didn't hate the ending. I would say I just kind of wish it had come a lot sooner because it felt like we were stuck in this really confusing, frustrating thing where we were just repeating the same thing over and over, and Lenore was realizing how crap her life was and being dissatisfied and not knowing what to do about it. And it felt like we had that for like a good 200 pages or so before we finally got to her exploring what her life could be like and finally kind of deciding what it is she wants from life. So yeah, I think I just found this to be a frustrating read. I would give it, I want to say a 3.5. Part of me kind of wants to give this a low 3 because I am overall quite dissatisfied with my experience reading this, but it was readable. I didn't hate it, don't get me wrong. Like, I don't think this was a bad book, but I think for me, it just really missed the mark. And as I said, this is a book that on paper should have been something that completely worked for me, and in practice it just didn't. So yeah, my final thoughts on this, something I wish had really worked because it could have been so completely up my alley, but unfortunately I just kind of found it a bit tiresome and the characterization quite lackluster. Definitely has some good for her moments towards the end and a somewhat satisfying conclusion if I feel like it could have gone further with where it went, but just didn't quite work for me. Missed the mark. So I wasn't going to do many of these like halfway reading things for this video because I'm trying to just stick to the review, but I have started Play Nice by Rachel Harrison, my first Rachel Harrison book, and I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about it and how I'm going with it. I'm not really that far into it. It's actually taking quite a while to get to the main plot, which I'm not hating, but it's not as fast-paced as I was kind of expecting it to be. So Rachel Harrison has written other books such as So Thirsty, Black Sheep, and according to this here anyway, it says that she's kind of known for writing feminist horror novels, very much like has a bit of comedy and camp into it. So this book in particular, we are following this woman called Cleo. She is an influencer because we are in the modern day horror, and the thing about her though is that her and her 3 sisters grew up in a haunted house along with their mother. They were taken away after a couple of years, I believe, and went to live with their father instead. And they basically broke off complete contact with their mother because it is kind of implied that their mother was really abusive. And Cleo herself doesn't really remember a whole lot about the house itself. She kind of knows what her sisters and her father have told her, and that is that the house was haunted and that their mother wrote like an essentially like an expose book about the time at the house, and the house is kind of popular amongst demonology circles, that kind of thing. But yeah, she personally doesn't really remember much about the house itself. So towards at the very start of the book, she actually finds out that her mother has passed away. So she goes back to her family to try and come to terms with this, I suppose, and she wants to go to the funeral. And at this funeral, she finds out that the house, which was apparently haunted, was never actually sold by her mother and still owned by her mother and has been left to the 3 sisters in the will. The sisters don't want anything to do with it, but Cleo sees it as an opportunity because she's an influencer and she knows one of her friends did something very recently where she flipped a house and it was very popular. So she's like, you know what? I'm going to turn this house around then sell it and make money from it and try and get something positive out of this. So that is basically where I'm at the moment. I am like 100 pages in. She's only just got into the house really at this point. We're spending a lot of time with her and her family and her sisters, and I've really been enjoying that, like getting this depth and seeing the complexity of their family dynamic and how Cleo is seen as like the younger sister of the group and how she interacts with them. I really enjoyed getting to see that side of her before we presumably start getting into when things are going to get scary with her flipping the house. I'm hoping that because we spent so much time with the family, this means that they are going to kind of keep being in this for the rest of the book, because I think they're all really interesting. So yeah, that is kind of where I'm at with this at the moment. I'm liking it. I'm not super invested at the moment. Like, I've kind of been reading this slowly over a couple of days whilst also reading other things, and I haven't felt the need to like really go back to this, but I am liking it. I'm just not at the point where it's hooked me yet, if you get me. But I think things are about to start getting creepy, and hopefully that means I will get hooked by this, because I've been hearing really good things about this book and about Rachel Harrison in general, and I really hope she's an author for me because all of her books sound really good to me. Back at you again with another review. This one is for Play Nice by Rachel Harrison. Actually, my first Rachel Harrison I've ever read. All of her books kind of sound like they would be my thing. We have Cackle, Black Sheep, I think. Yeah, I've got some on the back here. Black Sheep, So Thirsty. They're all kind of fun, campy, I want to say tropey horror, just because they deal with common horror tropes. But I've never really tried her stuff before. But I also feel like from what I've heard, she's very hit or miss for people. And a lot of people don't necessarily like the more fun take she has on horror, whereas that is actually my kind of horror. So I went into this one with mixed expectations, I suppose. I was kind of hoping I was going to like it. I'd seen that Books on Lala had recently read this and rated it a 4-star. So I had hopes that it would be my kind of thing. So this is dealing with the haunted house trope of the horror genre. And it's also a lot about family, which I really enjoyed. That is like the central focus of this book. And we kind of, as I said earlier, when I was starting my read through of it, a lot of the first part of this book is just kind of setting up the scene of this family and how they're a little bit dysfunctional, but how they also still genuinely love one another and have each other's backs. We have 3 sisters. Our main character is the youngest sister, with all of the younger sister kind of personality traits that you kind of expect to see. She's a little bit chaotic. She gets away with a lot of stuff. And the other sisters are kind of a little bit more responsible than she is. She's actually a fashion influencer and a stylist, so she has a very like public facing life, and she's very like fun and happy-go-lucky, and that's kind of her brand. However, she actually grew up in a haunted house with an abusive mother. But basically the plot is at the start of this book, her mother has passed away suddenly, and her sisters have not seen their mother in many years. Cleo, who is our main character, was the youngest when they were taken away from the house and went to live with their mother, and she doesn't really remember a lot of stuff, to be honest, about what happened to her there. It's more that she's just kind of told about things. And her mum also wrote a book which was about the haunted experience she had in the house, but the sisters have all kind of pacted together to not read this book. So Cleo has never read the book. It's not something she really spends a lot of time thinking about, to be honest, until her mother unexpectedly passes away. So she goes to join her sisters. We get to meet them. I really enjoyed meeting the whole family. I thought they were really like well written and nuanced, and also just really fun as well. I really liked their relationship in this, even if like they were kind of bickering at times with one another. But Cleo wants to go to the funeral, which the other sisters do not want to do. And at the funeral, she finds out essentially that the house was never actually sold. and still belongs to them and has been left to them in the will by their mother. So the rest of the family want nothing to do with it. They just want to sell it and get rid of it. But Cleo kind of sees it as like a fun thing she can do for her brand, in that she can flip the house and make content from it before selling it. And she's like, well, I have no memories of it anyway, so it's not like it's really going to affect me, and I'd like to do this. So she starts doing that, only of course the house is in fact haunted, and in fact it is haunted by a demon that took a very special interest in her when she was younger. And whilst she is kind of doing this in the house and things are happening with her family as well, their relationship is getting more strained as she is starting to kind of delve deeper into the secrets of the past. She starts to read the book that their mum wrote, because she actually left her an annotated copy, and starts to sort of unravel some of the things that maybe she had been led to believe about her mother, and how much of it was really true, and if the house was in fact haunted. So yeah, this was a pretty fun read. I would say it was almost a bit of a slow burn read for a horror. I did take my time with this one, and that wasn't because I was bored. I was like interested the whole time, but it was quite slow in terms of plot happening, and I didn't mind that. I liked that it was slowly revealing stuff, and the ending did kind of like bring things up quite a few notches to genuinely have like a bit more of the horror coming into it. But I know me, and from what I can see other reviewers will say, this is kind of light on the actual scares. I think it does really get scary towards the end, but before that it's almost kind of like amusing horror, like the demon or whatever in the house is kind of annotating in her books as well, and like leaving smiley faces everywhere and stuff. And for a while, like, I was wondering if it was like actually the ghost of her mother or something that was trying to reach out to her because her mother died in the house. I would have loved to know a little bit more lore about the demon, to be honest, because once we actually did get to like they started doing things, it was definitely more interesting. Yeah, overall, I thought this was a really good book that dealt with past trauma, unraveling like who is really right in situations. Is there really a right or a wrong person in terms of a family breakup, that kind of thing. And I did really enjoy Cleo as a main character, even though I feel like she wouldn't work for a lot of people because she is selfish and a bit shallow, but I do think that we see her in more of a multifaceted way through the course of this book. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I can't say like the writing was amazing because I honestly didn't notice. So that just means it was fine. I assume I wasn't blown away by the writing, but I also wasn't distracted by it being bad in any way, just very readable. And not a fast book for me to read, surprisingly, which I don't mind. I liked taking my time with this. So I think overall, I'm going to be giving this one a low 4. I quite enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the investigation of family trauma and the family dynamics that we had. The horror definitely took a bit of a backseat, but I was kind of okay with it in this case because it was so much more about character narrative and character development, I think, than it was necessarily about trying to scare the pants off you. So yeah, that is my review of Play Nice. One I quite enjoyed, and I would definitely read more by Rachel Harrison in the future, I think. So I'm here to talk to you about the new book by Isabel Cañas, The Possession of Alba Diaz. She has previously been in the Goodreads Awards in the horror before with, I believe, The Hacienda and Vampires of El Norte, and predominantly what she writes is historical horror, kind of genre blending with romance. And I've heard really good stuff about her, but I'm not really a big romance fan, so I definitely went into this with a little bit of trepidation, even though I was intrigued by the premise of this, and I've heard that the writing is really good. And I was pleasantly surprised by this book. I really enjoyed it. I still feel like it really delivered on the horror, but what it really delivered on, yes, it did have romance, but really what this book was a very slow burn examination of these two characters and how the possession is affecting them both, and how the world that they're living in, which is in Mexico in a certain time era where there is a plague going on. They are near a silver mine, and there is just a lot of political turmoil also happening, as well as the historical elements that we expect to see, such as lack of autonomy for our main female character, Alba. And yeah, I actually thought it was really well written. I overall gave this a 4.5, I think. It wasn't quite a 5-star. I think it was perhaps just a little too slow in some parts, and I didn't necessarily enjoy all of the romance that we got. Some of the writing was a little bit wobbly in terms of the romance at times. It's very much we fell in love with each other very quickly kind of thing, but I'm not usually a fan of that. But this was at least kind of done reasonably well, I think, where the circumstances that they were in justified the fact that they grew close very quickly, because she grew to depend on him as the only person who was really genuinely trying to help her, and potentially had the power to do so because he is very kind of attuned to things that basically can ward off demons. And he's also one of the few people that, him being kind of an outsider in the family and also not necessarily considered being part of the family, is able to do things outside of the family essentially. And even though it gets him into trouble, he is this more neutral party, I suppose. But yeah, I can definitely see how this maybe isn't a book for everyone, like I said, although it definitely has the horror. It is not necessarily like original in terms of the possession and how that plays out, but I think it's done very well, and I like the focus it put on it. It never felt like the romance was like overtaking the actual horror plotline of our main character basically going into this cave and getting possessed, and all the happenings after that with her trying to get it exorcised and all the family drama and stuff. Like, it still felt like it was always very central. It's, like I said, it's a great character study of a book, and I feel like for some people, like if you're going in expecting a fast-paced body horror, kind of crazy horror, this is not the book for this. But if you're interested in a more atmospheric, slow burn, as I said, character focused sort of book, then this really does work. And I did like the romance, which, if you know me, I'm very picky when it comes to romance. Overall, really enjoyed this. I'll definitely be checking out more by Isabel Cañas. I thought this was so strong. At this point of me reading the books, I am like 12 books in that I've read for this video, and this is my second favourite, because I truly feel like the atmosphere, the writing, the characterization was just so well done. And even some of the horror moments genuinely were quite scary, I think. Even if it wasn't necessarily going for the, we're really going crazy with the scares, I still thought it was just really well done. And yeah, one I would definitely go back to, and I would definitely check out more by Isabel Cañas now that I know how she kind of blends the horror and the romance together. And I think it does work quite well, rather than it being too like chalk against cheese kind of thing. So yeah, that's my thoughts on The Possession of Alba Diaz. What I'm hoping will do pretty well in the Goodreads Awards. I'm not sure how well her books have done previously. I know they've been in them. I don't know if they've ever made it to the top 10, but I feel like everyone I know who has tried the books has really enjoyed them, so I'm hoping that's a good sign. Okay, so I actually just went and checked, and she did a lot better in the previous years of Goodreads when she's had books in them than I thought. She was also down for debut novel 2022. This was for The Hacienda, and she came second overall in the horror category for that year, and I think she came fourth the year after for Vampires of El Norte, so that actually does suggest she could be in the top 10. I don't know if she's a contender for winning necessarily, just because I think with having really other big authors in here, Grady Hendrix, Stephen King, I don't think she's going to make it. But I'm hopeful that she's going to at least place quite high. So I have started the new Chuck Tingle book, Lucky Day. I'm not loving this so far. I'm really sad to say. I've gotten through what I know everyone says is like the crazy bit at the beginning before it then does a time skip and gets, I'm assuming, a little bit more coherent, but I'm not really enjoying this, I've got to say. This is kind of like a weird sci-fi fantasy horror, I suppose it definitely does lean more on the sci-fi, I think, so far, but also the horror elements are really present. There's a lot of body horror, crazy deaths happening just in those first 50 pages alone. So what is happening basically is that this disaster happened called the low probability event. 8 million people were killed in a single day. Our main character is thankfully not one of them. She's called Vera. She was a statistics and probability professor, very type A personality. And at the start of this book, we are seeing her on this celebratory day of her book about to be published. She's going out for brunch with her fiance and some friends, and the big thing also is that she is trying to work on coming out to her mother because her fiance is a woman and her mother is not aware of this and she's never come out to her. So stuff happens. We definitely got a very good characterization of the protagonist, I would say, from that beginning, and then everything just kind of goes crazy and escalates when this probability event occurs, and there is like people hanging from inflatable balloon animals. They've been hung by the strings. Basically, it's like improbable things are happening. So we have like a chimpanzee killing someone with a typewriter and just really crazy things just happening around them. Our main character somehow manages to survive this, although from what I gather, no one else she knows does. So we then pick up 4 years later with her just existing. Essentially, she's very much become a shut-in, it feels like. She's afraid to go anywhere and she's not really living anymore. And I'm assuming the rest of this book is going to be taking her into a place where she will start to live again, I suppose. I know this takes place in Vegas. So looking at the premise for this, it then says that a special agent shows up on her doorstep investigating a suspiciously and statistically impossibly lucky casino. He needs her help to prove the casino's role in the low probability event. Offers Vera one last chance to make sense of an unlikely world. So there's definitely this feeling almost more philosophical, I suppose, in terms of its theme. But I just don't really know where I'm going, and if I'm being completely honest, I really don't like our protagonist at the moment, but we'll see how it goes. I guess it's thankfully quite short. It's like barely 300 pages, and I feel like it will read quite fast. I'm just not necessarily vibing with this one as much as I vibed with Bury Our Gaze last year. Right, here to talk to you about Chuck Tingle's latest book, Lucky Day. It's quite a short one actually. It's just under 300 pages, so I got through this super fast. It's very fast paced as well. I didn't like this as much, unfortunately, as the previous Chuck Tingle book I read, which was Bury Our Gaze last year. Let me tell you about the premise for this one first, however. This is actually, I think to me, more of a sci-fi than it is a horror. It definitely does have bits of both genres, but I feel like the overall story is more sci-fi, but with like lots of horror elements put in there as well. So part of me wonders if this would be better in the sci-fi category than the horror category, but I'm not sure. It is tagged as horror first and foremost, and I think because Chuck Tingle's previous 2 other books that are not all his like silly little romances that he writes, because they have been horror, I think this automatically has been put into the horror genre, even though it's kind of a blend of both genres, I would say. But for me, it felt more sci-fi to me than it did horror. But basically, this book is about a former statistics and probability professor called Vera. Former because an event happened that changed everything in the world. So, my thoughts on this book. I didn't love this as much, unfortunately, as Bury Our Gaze. I still thought it was pretty good. Overall, I think I'm going to give this a 3.5. I did eventually start to like our main protagonist a little bit more as she starts to come back to herself, starts to realise that things are worth living for again. But I think overall, this didn't necessarily work for me, but it definitely had some really cool ideas, some really cool settings, some cool set pieces. But I just didn't really connect to this one as much, I think, as Bury Our Gaze. I don't think the horror elements were quite as strong as Bury Our Gaze, and as people have said, like, it has this crazy first 50 pages. It then calms down for about for the whole like entire third of the book mostly, and is kind of just like a bit of a mystery for a while as Vera and our agent are trying to work out what is exactly happening at the casino, what is potentially causing these low probability events to occur, which are killing hundreds of people. And as it's going through this, like, Vera is starting to feel again, and she then starts to kind of cross-examine her partner and the way he's doing things, and she doesn't like it. I really liked that she didn't just take what he did at face value, and she was starting to see what was happening behind the scenes, and she was starting to not trust him, even though he was also someone that was helping her bring her back to herself. And I thought that was really interesting, this dynamic they had between it being a friendship, but also that he would do anything to basically like solve this case, even if it meant that, for example, people got hurt along the way. And I thought that was really interesting to see. The last little bit again definitely picked up, and it kind of went a bit balls to the wall crazy again. And I really enjoyed what happened with Vera in that last aspect. But there was just something missing in this book for me, unfortunately, that meant it just didn't quite hit that 4-star mark, which is a shame because I think it has great ideas. I did warm to the characters eventually. I think maybe just like the tone and the pacing was a little bit all over the place at times. The crazy beginning, the kind of quieter middle, and then we kind of got a lot more like philosophical towards the end, which I did like the end for this one. I think for me, it was just a miss, unfortunately. Like, the plot of this one didn't quite work for me compared to Barry Arguez, but it's definitely not a bad book, justifiably in these awards, I think, and I would recommend it to people. I just don't think it was as strong, and maybe it's because it's shorter. Maybe it could have actually helped with being a little bit longer to develop some of the ideas it has a little bit better. Also, I felt the whole time I was reading this, I was like, this would make such a cool movie, which I think I felt during Barry Arguez too, but part of me feels like if I was watching this as a movie, I would enjoy it more than reading the book. I don't know what that says about me. I think it's just the way it was very visual. It had all the fast-paced moments, and I guess I just wanted to see this done visually, and I feel like spread over a movie length time compared to the book, I feel like it would come across better, but that might just be my opinion. So yeah, not a bad one. 3.5 I think I'm giving it. Just didn't really work for me, but I can see from Goodreads reviews that it has worked for a lot of people, which I'm really glad about. I think, as I said, this one just not quite for me. Do not mind this being the actual ass crack of dawn, but I need to talk to you about When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy. So this was definitely one of the more higher anticipated ones I had to read on this list. It's one I've actually been hearing quite a bit about, and I've only heard good things about it. I didn't really know very much about what it was going in. I knew the initial premise, I knew it probably has something to do with werewolves, but I didn't really have any, thankfully, like spoilers or preconceptions going into this. I've never read from Nat Cassidy before, although definitely there are books on his backlist that I do want to read, but this one has been getting a lot of hype this year. People have been bigging it for book clubs, that kind of thing. So let me tell you what it's about. So we are following Jess, who is a struggling actress, and an incident happens at her work, so she's already kind of in turmoil at the start of this book, and then she goes home and finds this like lost 5-year-old boy hiding in the bushes outside of her apartment. So she brings him in, and then his father shows up, and then his father turns into a monster. Basically, Jessa and this little boy go on the run together, trying to get away from his father, essentially, and stuff happens, shall we say, that is outside of anyone's control or preconceptions. So this book deals an awful lot about family trauma, about your relationship with parents, particularly strained relationship or absent relationship with parents. At the start of this book, Jess has just found out that her father, who she hasn't seen since she was little, passed away recently. It's causing her turmoil emotionally. It's also causing a strain in her relationship with her mother, who she is normally very close to. Her mother is kind of her best friend in this book. And obviously we've got this mirrored parallel with this little boy who is terrified of his father, who is trying to get him back. And Jess basically forms this bond with the little boy. It's like not an easy bond to form, but they kind of become a little found family to one another, and she starts to teach him about things that can help him deal with his issues and how he sees the world around him, because he's been very isolated from the world around him. He doesn't really know what very much is. He's been a very sheltered child. And this book had so much heart. I really, really loved the characters in this book. I loved the relationships that we got in the characters in this book. I really thought this relationship between Jess and the kid was so cute, and not in a way that felt like saccharine and forced. Like, this kid is not like a sweet little kid, like he's a real kid who deals with real issues, and Jess has to navigate that as someone who has never looked after children before. Has only really got her own life experiences to draw on to teach him. Meanwhile, of course, the stakes are rising higher and higher as the father is coming to get them, and other shadowy forces, shall we say, are also getting involved. Really, really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really well done. I was never bored once. I think for me, the ending I wasn't super crazy on. I thought we had an interesting twist towards the end, but for me, I think it lost it a little bit towards the end, and there were certain elements of brutality, deaths, shall we say, that happened through the book that I felt I kind of wish hadn't happened, I suppose, particularly with regards to one specific character in relation to Jess. But it definitely did go like full horror, balls to the wall when it needed to, which was nice, because we had this like really soft storyline, well, not a soft storyline, but we had this really emotional through line through it of Jess and this boy. But then we also really did go like full crazy when we got to the horror. And yeah, I really, really enjoyed this one. I think I'm giving this a mid-4. It's again not quite a 5-star for me, but really had a good time with this one. I thought the writing was really readable, and yeah, characterization was really good. I was actually kind of surprised when I found out that Nat was a guy, because I thought he wrote Jess really well, so that was nice. And like looking at his back catalogue, I kind of assumed he was a woman, because Nat is such a gender neutral name, because he wrote Mary, which is all about a woman basically. And he wrote another book as well, which I can't quite remember, but I feel like it's also a female protagonist. And reading the afterword in this is also really good, because it tells you so much about why Nat wrote this book and how it came about, because of his own kind of distant, confused feelings about his father, and him wanting to write about his father because his father had such a great story but wouldn't write anything down. And Mary, I believe, was also about his mother. So yeah, really interesting how Nat kind of delves into the personal aspects of his life to fuel his books. And yeah, overall, I thought this was really good. It went a little bit in a direction I was not expecting. Like, I kind of figured out what the deal was with the kid pretty fast. And not gonna lie, this kind of reminded me of Bury Our Gaze a little bit, just because of certain aspects to the horror, I think, and how fear is kind of shown. I suppose it reminded me a little bit of that, but also some other things that I'm not going to mention, because I do think just mentioning what they are is a spoiler to kind of what the deal is with the kid. But yeah, really interesting. Definitely not like a traditional werewolf story, which is kind of what I thought this was going to be going in. It is not really that at all. It's much more about family. It's about the nature of fear. It's being able to get over fear and be able to see the world around you in a way that you can overcome obstacles. Really, really solid. Hoping this makes it quite high in the list. I don't think Nat Cassidy has ever been in the Goodreads Awards before for any of his horror books, but like I've definitely heard of his horror books before. I've heard people talk about them before, and I think this one has been getting a good amount of buzz this year, so I do hope it makes it in. And yeah, overall, really solid read. Glad I got to this. We'll definitely be checking out more from this author. Hello, so I finished What Hunger by Katherine Dang. This was a really quick, weirdly easy read despite the subject matter. It's like about 250 pages or something, and I think I finished this basically in 2 sittings. I found it really immersive, really easy to get into right from the get-go. So this is Katherine Dang's second book, and another one doing one of the tropes we're seeing a lot in horror this year, which is women discovering cannibalism. This one actually feels kind of YA in nature though. Our main character, Veronica, or Ronnie, is an American Vietnamese girl, and she's 14 when everything happens in this book. So a lot of it is like to do with her being 14 and her starting high school and that kind of thing. So it does kind of have a bit of a YA feel, even though we are dealing with some dark subject matter. So essentially, yeah, in this book, it is a lot to do with family trauma. It's a lot to do with diaspora in particular, because both of their parents are Vietnamese, but their parents came from Vietnam to America, so they have only ever known America. So they have that kind of disconnection from that side of their family, and also like so much about their family they're still kind of unaware of. Their parents don't talk much about the past, just that it was really horrible, some of the things that they lived through. They eat lots of Vietnamese food, but also they're used to eating American food, and they also don't really even know Vietnamese. So whenever they have like family gatherings and stuff, like they kind of are a little bit left out because they only really know English and smatterings of Vietnamese. So it's a lot to do with that side of it. But yeah, I actually really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really well done, and it dealt with some very sensitive topics, but I think it dealt with them well. And you know me, like I'm always one to sort of give you content warnings if I think it's stuff that might upset people, and this one does have one of my usual kind of triggers, to be honest, in that it does deal with sexual assault at one point, but I think it dealt with it very well. It didn't linger on it, and I just thought it was interesting how it was dealt with. Essentially, like, a tragedy happens in the family at the start of this book during the summer before Ronnie starts high school. That kind of tragedy breaks her family apart, and Ronnie herself is struggling with what has happened and trying to understand how to deal with it. And then other things happen which basically serve to traumatize her further, basically, and she starts to kind of see cannibalism as a coping mechanism. So yeah, this book obviously is going to be pretty closely likened to The Eyes of the Best Part, I think, by Monica Kim, which was a book that came out last year. This is with the Vietnamese perspective. I really enjoyed seeing all the Vietnamese aspects with the family as well. It's not something I know very much about, so I really enjoyed that, and it was nice to see how, even though Ronnie is a child of immigrants, has never been to Vietnam, doesn't know what that was like for her parents, they're still very entrenched in Vietnamese culture, and so are their family. And there's also a lot to say about how Vietnamese people are treated in a foreign country like America, how they're often seen as lesser, how they're seen as small, how they're seen as weird and strange. A lot to do with that as well. And yeah, I just thought this was really good. Like, I really enjoyed our main character. I enjoyed the direction it took. It's definitely more of a psychological kind of thing than full horror, but it definitely does commit, I would say, to some of the cannibalism parts. And overall, yeah, I had a really good time with this. I thought it was a quick, fun horror read. Like, the thing that I did find with the other Asian horror book in these awards, which is Bat Eater and Other Names of Cora Zhang, although I also really liked that one, I found that tone to be so depressing and heavy that I found it to be difficult to get through, and I had no issues with this one. And I do think part of it is because it leans a little bit YA in terms of its tone and its writing, and I just think it deals with it well, but in a way that you're still kind of invested and immersed in what is happening and in the main character, but I also wasn't taken out of it by how dark it was, essentially. So yeah, one I really enjoyed. I'm giving this a 4.5, I think, so kind of level with Bat Eater, which I think I would still rate Bat Eater higher because I think it just had more to say and hit harder with what it was doing, but definitely a really good one. Do not sleep on this. I had a really good time with it, and I definitely want to read more by this author. So yeah, that is my thoughts on What Hunger. Hello, I'm on sprints as you can see, but I've started reading Immaculate Conception. I have to say, this does feel like it should have been more in the sci-fi category than in the horror category, which is where I originally thought it was going to be. It is definitely like psychological, but it's very much more sci-fi so far. And I can see how it's going to go down a horror route. We're starting to delve into that now, but I still think this is more sci-fi than horror right now. I'm really enjoying it, by the way, so far, though. I'm like 75 pages in, having a grand time, and yeah, really, really enjoying this one. It's very readable, which is nice. Hello! So, I did indeed finish Immaculate Conception by Ling Ling Huang. I really, really loved this. This was a 5-star. I was not expecting it to be. It started off and I was like, oh, I'm enjoying this. It's very readable. And I just loved where it went. I thought the writing was great. And I just really enjoyed the characters and the character arc that we took. It's very much more psychological, I would say, than it is outright horror. In fact, my caveat is, this is a 5-star. This shouldn't be in the horror category. This really, for me, feels like literary sci-fi. So you will see in my rating, like, this so far, at least in this video, is my favorite book, but it's not horror. I really don't see this as horror. It has potentially some horror elements, but it's really just literary sci-fi to me. I couldn't see it as anything else. So I feel like mismatched, but I did really love it, so I'll tell you about it regardless. Also, it's still in the award, so I have to. But yeah, this is obviously about our two female characters, Enka and Matfield. They meet at art school. Matfield is kind of seen as this genius, whereas Enka is very much struggling with her art, and she comes from a place of less privilege than the others, so she just doesn't know about a lot of art because her family have been trapped behind these buffers, which basically like close them off from like culture and the community. So she is very much like on the outskirts of this, and she sees Matfield as like the genius that she really wants to be. The two actually do form like this really good friendship with one another, but Enka struggles with jealousy throughout. But also, like, I thought even though she was struggling with jealousy, like, you could tell that she still really loved her friend. I would say this definitely gives Yellowface vibes a little bit as well, for slightly obvious reasons. But our protagonist, I think, is much more likable, and even though she does do some dreadful things, I kind of understood why. Like, I'm not rooting for her, but her actions definitely kind of made sense in the world and with what's happening to her. The world is really interesting, by the way, in this. But definitely in some sort of near future. Like, not a lot has changed, but enough has changed that technology can do crazy things. And we're very much seeing this kind of alternative AI very much playing off some of the fears that we have nowadays about how AI can just mimic everything, and you cannot get anything original anymore. And that is a big theme of this, because basically during the course of this, whilst they're students, this new computer program or something comes out, and basically like all the art they're making can be found in there. So the artists are struggling to be able to make art because it's all just being invalidated by the software, essentially. So I thought that was really interesting given the current state of how we feel about AI nowadays. So I thought that was really well done. The actual premise, I would say, is a lot slower to come about than you might think. Like, the whole thing about them sharing this mind together doesn't happen for quite a while, I would say. So do not expect that as being what the book is mostly about, because it kind of isn't. It's more about their interdynamics. It's about them existing in this world and their struggles to be artists and their friendship. Even though like our main character is married, like there are some very obvious sapphic undertones going on here. The author herself is queer. She has stated she is queer. So interesting that she didn't decide to go down that kind of route, but like also not invalidating the fact they had a great friendship. But yeah, so this is not a crazy out there sort of book. This is slow paced. This is much more thoughtful. It's very literary. But it just really worked for me, and I really, really enjoyed it. And now I definitely need to go check out more by this author. So yeah, that's my thoughts on this book. A brilliant book. My favourite so far, not horror. I've never felt more British than when I got to a certain smutty scene midway through this book, and my instant reaction was to be like, oh, I say. It wasn't even that smutty. I was just like, oh, there it is. Also, there's a whole scene with an eyeball. If you know, you know. Yeah, this book is delivering on both the smutty lesbianness and also the horror. I'm having such a good time with this book so far. Hello, here's to talk to you about Blood on Her Tongue by Johanna van Veen. This was a 5-star. I can't believe I got 2 5 stars in a row in this video, and unlike the last 5-star, this one definitely does belong in the horror category. But God, what can I tell you about this book? I had such a good time with this. I like blasted through it in 24 hours. It was so readable, and I just really, really loved my time with it. I can't even say it was like the writing was particularly beautiful. I think the writing was good, obviously, but I just was super immersed in it. I was really invested in the story. I really liked the characters. This just really worked for me. This definitely did give me Dracula vibes, not only because of the subject matter, but also because our protagonist is called Lucy, who is the name of the other female character in Dracula, who a lot of people forget about because they only remember Mina. But interestingly, I went into this expecting this to be a sapphic vampire story, and while there are definitely queer elements in this book, it isn't actually with the main protagonist. It's with other characters in this book, and really, this book more is about family, and particularly about the relationship between these two identical twins, Lucy and Sarah. And basically, Lucy is our protagonist. We see things from her perspective, but the whole vampire stuff is kind of happening to Sarah, and Lucy has to grapple with what to do about it, essentially, and going against what is perhaps the right thing to do, but because it's her sister, she'll do it. So yeah, it's about the lengths we'll go to for our family as well. So I'll give you a basic premise for this book as well. This is set in the Netherlands, 1887. I really like this was like not a British one, to be honest, because I feel like so much vampire stuff is British or American. I like we were firmly in Europe. This is also where the author is from as well, I believe. And Lucy, we start off and Lucy is like on a journey to go see her sister Sarah, who is married, is, you know, she's in like a rich estate, that kind of thing, and her sister's been unwell, so she's going to go to her and see if she can help, essentially. Lucy is unmarried, and they make a big point of that, like how she's wasting her life because she's a companion to an old woman, but it's very clear that she's just not really interested in anyone except one specific person. And I liked how that thing about her liking this one specific person changed throughout the course of the book. I like how it wasn't static, how she got to see more sides to that person and was able to make her own informed decision about it. She starts off, I would say, kind of naive. She's smart, but she's very much more, you know how they say there's a loud twin and a quiet twin? She is the quiet twin, and Sarah is the more vivacious one and the one who is more outspoken, the one who gets things done, and Lucy is just not that, but she starts to grow out from her sister's shadow during this book, which I really liked. She is kind of a frustrating protagonist, I would say, at times. You don't always kind of agree with what she's doing, and you wish that maybe she'd be a bit more outspoken, but I think she genuinely learns how to do this and be more true to herself through the course of this book. I'm not going to really go into the details of what happens to them both in the book because I feel that's spoilers, and this really is a book that I feel like it works so much better when you go in really not knowing what's going to happen. But it definitely had some really shocking horror moments which I enjoyed, but there was a lot of heart and tenderness to this book as well. Also, I now understand why there is a dog on the front cover of this, because there is a dog in the book who is in it quite a lot. So yeah, I thought this was really good. Definitely, in some ways, I felt this gave me what I wanted Hungerstone to give me, to be honest. That I really wanted more of the emotion and the follow through that Hungerstone just didn't quite do, but I think this book did do. There's also a lot of talk, because this is the 1800s, there's a lot of like examination of how women are perceived to be lesser than men. Hysteria, that kind of thing, is very much also a key theme in this book. The men pretty much always undermine the women in this book, which makes the ending so much better. Yeah, we have another book that is all about female rage, and I really enjoyed it. And yeah, I just thought this was really well done. I definitely want to read more by this author now. I think she's only got one other book, which is My Darling Dreadful Thing. Definitely checking that out now. I can see now why that one got quite a lot of hype, because I think I read the premise for that one and I just was not keen on the premise. It didn't sound like something that would be for me, and I didn't quite get why it was getting popular. But having read this, I think it is the writer's writing, to be honest, and her characterization that really makes this book work. Just really interesting world building in terms of what they did with the vampire. I like it had some elements of a traditional vampire, like we do literally have Dracula quotes throughout this. It's very clearly obviously inspired, but it also does its own thing, which I enjoyed, and it does things that I've not seen other books necessarily do. And I just thought that was really interesting, and went again into it went down much more of a less human route with vampire, which I enjoyed personally, rather than it being the tortured, oh my god, I'm turned into a vampire. This was very much more a more inhuman take, but still again had a lot of heart, which I enjoyed. So yeah, that is my very quick review of Blood on Her Tongue. I think this might actually be what I'm voting for. We'll have to see, because I still have another like 8 or 9 books to get through at this point, but this was really good. So I figured I should actually give you an update on the Bewitching, as I am not quite halfway, but I'm a decent chunk of the way through at the moment. This is Sylvia Moreno Garcia's new book. It is, as is most of her books, or at least the ones I've read, kind of historical Mexican Gothic horror. This one is actually about 3 different women, however, and about witchcraft that the 3 women kind of have throughout their family. So we initially start off with Minerva, who is a young woman in our kind of time era. Basically, she's an academic. She's working on a thesis or something, I think, at the moment. And she is researching into the history of horror literature, and in particular, a horror writer called Beatrice Tremblay, who has not really been very widely known at this point. So she's trying to write her graduate thesis on that. Not gonna lie, as soon as I heard the word Tremblay as well, my brain automatically went to Paul Tremblay. I don't know if that is like a little bit of a wink towards him, I'm not sure. Although definitely at one point I also heard mention the name Stephen Graham Jones, and I'm like, I feel like that was on purpose. And yeah, so Minerva's assembling this thesis together primarily around Tremblay's most famous novel, Them Banishing, which was apparently inspired by a true story. And then we're seeing also her great-grandmother's perspective, Alba, who basically passed down a lot of stories, particularly of witchcraft, to Minerva. And yeah, I believe from what I've got to so far, I think Alba and Beatrice Tremblay, at least, are possibly students at the same time together. And then there's a missing girl that happens on the campus that they're in. Alba told about her girlhood in 1900s Mexico, where she had a terrifying encounter with a witch. Minerva suspects that the same shadow that darkened the lives of her great-grandmother and Beatrice Tremblay is now threatening her own in 1990s Massachusetts. So it is technically historical then, because it's set in the 90s. I hate that we have to say the 90s is kind of historical now. But yeah, so that is basically what the book is about. I knew going into this that there are particular triggers that I didn't know if I was going to be okay reading this. I know there is sexual assault and there is incest in this book, very much like in Mexican Gothic, which was kind of the whole issue why I didn't love Mexican Gothic as much as I really wanted to. So I have started it. I'm actually really enjoying it so far, I will say. I've been doing it by audiobook, which is a really good way to do it. I think the audiobook narrative is really good, but I don't know if I'm going to finish this in time for this video, and that is because not only do I only have a day left to finish it, because I was listening to the audiobook whilst I was travelling, I don't know if I've necessarily taken in the story as well as I could have done. And whilst I'm enjoying what I have taken in, I don't think I can give this a very good review at this moment, and I don't think I can wrap this up very well in this moment. I am thankfully very glad that so far at least I'm actually really enjoying it. I'm liking it much more than Mexican Gothic in terms of the writing. I think the story as well is very much just more interesting to me personally, whereas Mexican Gothic I think was kind of something I'd seen before, and I do think The Bewitching is doing something that is just much more up my alley of interest. But as I said, there are some triggers that I'm a little wary about going further in because I really don't like those kind of triggers. So whilst I will be finishing this book, at the moment I think I'm probably going to be giving it a high rating. I can already see a 4 for this at the very least. It could even get up there, but because I don't know if I'm going to finish this in time, I'm actually going to hand over to a friend of mine who has reviewed this book already, did a brilliant review on her own channel, and I reached out to her actually well before I started reading this because I knew it was going to be a book that I might have to DNF if the triggering got a bit too much for me. And I asked Tiff from Tiff Reads Book to do me a little bit of a review of this and her thoughts on the book The Bewitching. So I'll pass over to Tiff now.
Let's talk about The Bewitching. Kyla asked me to do this today because I read it and I enjoyed it. But I have some things about it that I didn't necessarily enjoy. So briefly, the book follows 3 timelines and 3 different women in those timelines whose stories all interconnect. We follow a timeline from the early 1900s in Mexico, from during the Depression, I think the early 1930s, like pre-World War II, just in the beginning of the Depression, middle of the Depression in New England. And then we follow post-COVID in the same area. And our main character is set during that post-COVID, I think it's like 2021-ish, 2022, somewhere around there, as a grad student in the literature department at this small university that kind of gives old money Ivy League vibes. That's the essential setting that we're following. This is kind of a story of power, control, and who has the power and the control, and what people will do to take the power and the control. Also a lot about greed and inadvertently money because of those topics. I enjoyed following our main character, Minerva, whose name I just remembered. I've been trying to remember it for like a week. Minerva. I really liked her a lot. She starts off the book dealing with some pretty heavy depression, and I feel like the representation of that, of what it's like to deal with depression in grad school, was actually pretty accurate to my experiences, and I identified with her right off the bat from that. The overwhelmingness of being in grad school, even if it's exactly what you've always wanted, especially when you're not super close with your mom, like I am and she was. So there was that kind of aspect that drew me into it right away. The story that was the hard one for me was Alba's story, because we start off with her in late teens, and there's this weird interaction with her and her uncle from the very beginning. And at first I thought it was just like, oh, her uncle's like wealthy and she wants to impress him. She looks up to him. They're not too far apart in ages, so it's like that kind of like close bond you might have with like a cousin who you're like, oh, their life is so much better. I need to like show them that I'm not just a simple country bumpkin. But no. Her uncle had clearly done some grooming type behaviors with her, and I was like, oh no, this is gonna go to the bad place. And it does, but over the battle of witching powers. essentially. And there is a lot of uncomfortable scenes with that, but it has very much to do with the witchcraft of the story. It didn't feel out of place, but I felt like we could have done something else with that scene because it definitely goes to the bad place. But how she overcame everything and how she used some of that situation when she realized the situation she was in to her own control was an okay outcome of it, I guess. I'm struggling to say it because it was a difficult scene for me, but it wasn't like out of place in a horror novel, you know? So there was that aspect to it, and it was her telling this story to Minerva that allowed Minerva to realize the situation that she had gotten herself in the modern day while researching this writer from the 1930s who was then dealing with a similar type experience. And it ties it all together with this idea of witches that kind of blend vampirism and our United States, Western Europe idea of a witch with the Latin American view of a witch that Silvia Moreno Garcia brings to the front of the story. So I think that aspect of it was, I enjoyed that and how the witches use blood and the taking of it as the way that they get their power and control. So those things kind of all tied together to bring apart these themes, where we ended up talking a lot about too, about class disparity and the differences between how people deal with that and what they may experience. And so there was a lot of layers to this in these three stories. Personally, if I'm comparing it to Bury Our Bones in the Midnight Soil, which also followed three women across three different timelines and was vampires, I preferred the Silvia Moreno Garcia one. So that's my very brief review. And thanks for letting me do this, Kyla. I'm super happy to share my thoughts about it. I do have a longer review on my channel if you want to look at that for any other information on it, which I'm saying to you and you can totally cut out of this video.
So I literally just this minute finished The Haunting of Paynes Hollow by Kelly Armstrong, I think her name was, who I discovered did write some like angel stuff, not necessarily Buffy, and generally has just written a whole load of supernatural romance kind of stuff back in the 2000s kind of era. And it was fine. It was very easy listening. It really kind of gave me T. Kingfisher vibes, but not quite as good, to be honest. The characters and the plot wasn't quite as interesting as how T. Kingfisher makes it, and it was just kind of fine in the end. I think I'm giving it a 3.25. I did like the main protagonist. She was very like kind of savvy and self-aware, which I appreciate, but yeah, overall I didn't think the plot was very good. It did go down a supernatural route, which I'm happy about. Turns out The Haunting of Paynes Hollow, in the story itself, the place is kind of inspired by an urban legend there about a horse, headless horseman, which they said was an inspiration for Sleepy Hollow, or vice versa. So yeah, she has to go back to her old family home that she's not been back to since she was a child after her father killed a neighborhood boy. And that's kind of been hanging over her all the time, but she's forced to go back after the funeral of her grandfather. He is forcing her to stay there for a month to get her inheritance, and she finds out the truth, essentially, what really happened back in the day, and maybe her father was not entirely to blame. It did actually have some deaths, which I was at least impressed by. I obviously won't say who because spoilers, but it was so kind of light at times. I didn't think it was going to go hard enough to actually have some body horror. I did think the horror elements when we had them was good, but they were few and far between. And yeah, this was just very easy listening for a horror, which is very unexpected. Yeah, don't know if I would check out more by this author. It was just kind of okay. Honestly, kind of forgettable. Let's just take a minute to appreciate how gorgeous the Evernight edition of this book is. Stunning. This is under the dust jacket, by the way. You will see the dust jacket when I'm reviewing, but I just want to show you how freaking cool this looks. So this might be the only update you're gonna get from me about You Were Meant to Be Human by Andrew Joseph White. I really want to read this book, but for me personally, this book is really heavy thematically, actually kind of triggering a little bit with some of the themes it deals with. It deals with a trans man who gets pregnant. I know it says at the beginning, because it does actually mention the triggers, which, by the way, really happy when people do that. Particularly authors actually say what trigger warnings there is. It does say that there is sexual assault and abuse, and I don't think I want to read this right now, unfortunately. I have technically started it, as you can see. I'm like a couple of chapters in, like chapter 3, about 22 pages in. I do really like the writing, which I was expecting. I've read Andrew Joseph White before with Hell Followed Withers, which is their YA debut. This is their horror adult debut. But I just don't think that right now I can read this and mentally be having a good time, if you get me. I think this is a book that I need to put aside and come back to at a later point. I definitely don't want to rush read this so that I can give you guys a review. So I'm sorry if this means I haven't technically read all 20 books in the category, but I have to do what's best for me in this case. And this book is just not right for me right now, I don't think. I am going to put it down for a couple of days. I still have a week left to be reading all the other books, so I may end up coming back to this if I feel like I can and try and read at least some more of it to tell you guys about it. But I think for now I may just have to not do this one. I will tell you what it's about though, in case you're curious. As I said, this is Andrew Joseph White's first adult debut. They primarily write YA horror. They've got 3 other books out at the moment. I think they've got another one coming out next year as well. And I actually read their YA debut with my book club for Halloween a couple of years back, and even though it was YA, because they don't really like reading a lot of YA, they really enjoyed it. And I really enjoyed it as well. I think the author's really good at writing. They're really good at storytelling and characterization. They are a trans autistic author, so you definitely see a lot of that kind of representation in this book and in all their books. To be honest, our main character is a trans man who is also autistic and selectively mute, I want to say. I don't know at this point if they are mute because of something that's happened or if they are selectively mute, and they're in kind of an abusive relationship, it feels like, with this other man. But this is set during like some sort of weird post-apocalypse, and there is this like hive that is some kind of cult that people are drawn to, and they are kind of with it. And that's all I kind of know about it at the moment. I know that essentially the main character, who is called Crane, gets pregnant. The hive don't want him to get rid of the baby. Basically, they demand the child's birth, and it's just gonna get messy from there, I assume. Definitely some similar themes to what there was in Hell Followed Withers, but I think because this is so much more adult, the content already is very adult, I will say. Like, before we start off pretty much at a very kind of aggressive sex scene. But yeah, I do like the writing. I do want to read this. I just don't know if now is the right time for me. So if you see any more updates about it, then obviously I did give it more of a go, but this might be all you see about this book, unfortunately. So, Coffin Moon by Keith Rosson. Keith Rosson has written a couple of other horror books before. I've never actually read any of them. I've seen, I think, Fever House around, but they're not really an author I was really aware of before these Goodreads Awards, to be honest. White male horror author, that is kind of the vibes this book gives. I didn't hate it though. I did actually quite like this one. I didn't love it either, unfortunately, to me. This is actually, I think it is blurbed. I think it's got a blurb by Stephen King in this. Oh, okay, so he blurbed Fever House, but it's got like a praise from a whole bunch of other authors. This actually did kind of feel like a Stephen King book when I was reading it, like an older Stephen King book back when he wrote good horror. That was kind of the vibes that it was giving me. We were seeing three different perspectives mostly throughout this book. We were seeing this man called Dwayne, who is an ex-Vietnam veteran still struggling with the PTSD from that, whose life is basically turned upside down by this vampire that comes in and destroys everything in his life. We see things from his niece's perspective, who is also peripherally, you know, kind of involved in that, and her journey throughout this book and her transformation throughout this book. And we're seeing things from the perspective of the big evil bad vampire guy called John Varley, and that was interesting to see from, because I didn't hate his parts, even though I was kind of expecting to really not like his parts, but I did actually like some of the introspection we got from him, some of the flashbacks we got as to how he became the creature he is now, essentially, and how he still does feel things, even though he very much is someone who just brutalizes everything he comes across. Yeah, this book had a lot of heart, I would say. Like, it didn't quite hit for me, unfortunately. I was never fully immersed in it, but objectively, I do think this was a decent book. It just didn't quite hit me the way I think it maybe hits other people. I thought it was well written, or at least I didn't notice the writing. Maybe something that could have actually pushed it into a higher rating for me, to be honest, if I liked the writing more. I just kind of thought it was fine. Unfortunately, this was a book that I was enjoying it whenever I was reading it. I just kind of forgot about it when I wasn't reading it, so I don't think this is one I'm going to pick up again. I don't know if I would read more by Keith Rawson. I like some of the things he's done in this book. I do thematically think he went with some good themes. He had decent characters and a good storyline, I think, that progressed to a natural point where I think the story would have gone. I don't think there was any twists, really. There was like one twist with the main girl, but I think otherwise the story was kind of predictable, I think. And I think overall this was just a decent horror read. Like, it didn't blow me away at all, but I liked it. I thought it was fine. I'm giving it a high 3. I think part of me is like maybe a low 4, but I do think this is a high 3 because I really think that a week from now I might have just forgotten everything about this. So yeah, not a bad book if you're interested in Stephen King-like kind of horror books. This is set in the 70s as well, which is really nice to see. Obviously, we have some great representation with the PTSD of our main character, Dwayne, but everyone is just kind of a white person as well. There is some queer representation, which is done all right, I would say. It's not amazing, but at least it's there, and I appreciate that it's there in a, like, grey tones, not necessarily black and white tones, at least, of good or bad. And yeah, this was all right. Didn't hate it, didn't love it, thought it was fine. I think I found my favourite book from this entire category. And as a bonus, it was one that I was really hoping was going to be one that I would love, and I did. I loved this so much. This is The Lamb by Lucy Rose. She is a debut author. I actually went to an event earlier at the start of the year. You may have heard me mention this earlier with Kat Dunn also for Hungerstone, and I hadn't really heard about the book prior to that. I was there mostly because of Kat Dunn, but I thought it sounded really interesting from what she was talking about. And then my friend Anna over at Anna Reads Horror read it and adored it. She gave it a 5-star. I'm going to keep my thoughts brief because I'm hoping she'll be able to give a wider thoughts and feelings about it, because I've actually asked her to review this, but I did want to read it myself. And yeah, I thought this was absolutely beautifully written, full of heart. I read this practically in one sitting. It's really easy to get through. It's like very short chapters, very just stream of consciousness inside the mind of this like 11-year-old girl who is living with cannibals, basically. And that is how she's been brought up. She's been brought up by a mother in the forest in a little shack, and every so often whenever strangers kind of get lost and come to their door for help, they're lured in and eaten. And that is her life. That's what she's grown up with. And throughout the course of this book, this is a coming of age story. As she's kind of growing into herself, her mother meets a woman who kind of shares similar inclinations, and the mother and the daughter start to move apart as the mother is becoming more obsessed with this woman that's kind of got involved in the family and become part of the family. And through that, and through our main character Margot growing up, we start to see her learning and starting to think for herself about what they're doing and starting to feel feelings about it, starting to feel guilt, starting to feel revulsion, starting to realize that the world is not just her and her mother. And she starts to feel things for other people outside of their sheltered little home. And I just thought this was really beautiful. This is a very queer book as well. Obviously, the mother has a relationship with another woman. The main girl also seems to harbour affectionate feelings for a fellow girl of hers, although I don't know if it's more a case of she wants to be her, but she also is kind of obsessed with her, and because of how she's been brought up, it makes her want to eat her, because that is all she's been taught, is that, you know, you bring in the pretty lost things and then you take them into yourself. But yeah, I just thought this was gorgeously written. Really did give me vibes of Bloom, I've got to say, by Delilah S. Dawson. Only like from a totally different perspective, of course, because we're seeing this through a child's eyes. But yeah, really, really beautiful. Easiest 5-star I've given all year, I think. And this is my pick, I think, for the horror category to win. I thought this was amazing.
Hey everyone, Anna Reads Horror here, and I am taking over this video to tell you why you definitely need to pick up The Lamb by Lucy Rose. Now, this is a 5-star read for me. This is going to be in one of my top 3 books of the year of 2025. And that is a lot, considering that I read this book in January and I just can't stop thinking about it. I think if you are just into horror, you would very much appreciate this. I also think that as a seasoned horror reader, you would love this book as well. Now, this is a debut from the author, which I am shook. Honestly, Lucy Rose has a lot of contributions to anthologies, and she also is a screenplay writer. This is set in the Cumbrian wilderness. It follows a family, a mother-daughter relationship, Margot and her mother, and they live in an isolated little house in the wilderness, and they capture strays. So when somebody gets lost from traveling or like walking and they can't get a signal, they knock on Margot and her mother's door and they ask for help. So Margot and her mother are used to these strays coming to the house, but the reason why they call them strays is pretty much because as soon as they bring them in, they lure them in, they feed the strays, they're there for a couple of days, and then Margot and her mother cook them up and eat them and bake them into pies. So yeah, there's some cooking recipes in this as well. No, I'm joking. So yeah, this uses cannibalism as a metaphor for love. But what I love about this book as well is it's got so many like folk gothic elements to it. It's like I would say it was like a bit of a mixture of like genres. If you are into Shirley Jackson, if you like feminist horror, then I'd definitely check this out. But having said all that, this to me felt very much like a coming of age story. We do follow Margot's perspective in all of this book, and it's just so raw. Her emotions are captured so well, and we also get to realise she has no control. She has a very destructive relationship with her mother. Her mother is not a great person, but there's also some nuance in the relationship. There's some nuance in each person, because of course nothing is black and white. There's a lot of qualities to a person. So the way that this explores these issues and the relationship dynamics that these two characters have is done very well, and it comes to almost a turning point once we get introduced to this new stray character called Eden, who approaches their homestead. The whole dynamic changes, and I just think that the way that that's explored is amazing. I can't really put it into words myself how good this book is, and I definitely think it's one for the weird girls. I would call this a weird girl horror. I know there's a lot of that going around at the minute, but I definitely related to this book. Although it was about cannibalism, which I can't relate to, not gonna lie. The way it just explored growing up and dealing with these issues with relationships in general, absolutely top tier. So if you're looking for a grim fairy tale with a lot of heart, pick this book up. And if that still hasn't convinced you, let me read you the first line of this book. On my 4th birthday, I plucked 6 severed fingers from the shower drain. Now, definitely check it out, and this definitely has my vote for the awards. See you later.
A quick check-in, because did we need a sequel to Bunny? No. I'm not mad we've got it though. I've got to say, I've just started this. I'm like 2 chapters in or something at the moment, and I'm having a great time. Like, I really enjoy being back in this world with these characters. I've not heard great things about the sequel, unfortunately, and as I said, Bunny felt like such a complete book. I don't know if we needed a sequel. Because this is a sequel as well, I can't really give you a whole lot of information in terms of the plot, because it will obviously spoil the first book. So Bunny, it's a book that came out a few years back now by Mona Award. It is a dark academia literary kind of magical realism. It gave me queer vibes, although it isn't actually categorized as queer, but I definitely got like queer undertones from it, and I really loved it. I thought the writing was stunning. I loved the characters. It was just like a perfect book to me. In that book, we are following, I think she's a grad student or something, but she's in this like writing group at university, and the other students who are in her writing group are this kind of group of girls that she calls the bunnies, because they're all very like similar to one another. They're all very like Mean Girls, plastique kind of vibes, and they just call each other Bunny constantly. They don't call each other by their names, they call each other Bunny. And they have this like mysterious smut salon that she's kind of been left out of, and then they invite her to it and they start to bring her into their collective. And it's weird, it's kind of culty, it's a lot about creativity and about feeling like an imposter syndrome and all those kind of things, because she is struggling to be a good writer during it. And yeah, that is the first book essentially, and this book picks up, I imagine, a couple of years later, I want to say, and we carry on. It does say it's not just a sequel, it's also a prequel, because this is essentially, what I gather, going to be the bunny's perspective on events. Because we saw things from Sam's point of view in that first book. This is their point of view. And they're kind of like trying to set the record straight, because Sam basically wrote a book about them, which is the bunny book. And they're like, that isn't how it went. We're going to tell everyone exactly how it really went. So yeah, I like that idea for that. As a novel, I'm enjoying it so far. We'll just see how it goes, basically, because yeah, it could just be very repetitive, unfortunately, and very similar to the first book, but I'm hoping it is actually quite good. Okay, so I did indeed read the only sequel in this list, which is We Love You, Bunny by Mona Award. Of course, the sequel to Bunny, which was released kind of a while ago now, to be honest. That was a dark academia with magical realism, fantastical elements. And I don't want to spoil what this book is about necessarily, but it definitely keeps those elements. It gets overtly more queer, which I really like. I definitely got the queer undertones from the original Bunny book, and I was glad to see it like actually outright confirmed in this book. I appreciate Mona Award did it rather than kind of queer baiting us a little bit. And yeah, this is kind of a prequel, as they say, a sequel and a response to Bunny. So basically, in the original book of Bunny, our main character Samantha is a writer on this writing program at a prestigious university. However, she doesn't get on with the other people in her program, who are these 4 girls, which she just calls the bunnies. They're weird, they're culty, they're very kind of Stepford Wivesy in how they present themselves, and they are kind of almost like one entity in some way, and they call each other Bunny, which is where the name comes from. Through this, Samantha starts to get closer to the bunnies, find out what the deal is with them, and gets kind of embroiled in that world too. And both of these books are a satire, essentially, on the world of academia and writing. It pokes a lot of fun at things like novels and poetry and that kind of thing. Mona Awad herself has been both a master's student of writing and is a teacher of writing as well. So she's very much seen this from both sides of the spectrum, and I just honestly did think this book was hilarious. I can very much see why this has not worked for a lot of people, and I think I will say that going into this, if you didn't like the bunnies as characters in the first book, then you're probably not going to like this book, because a lot of this book is told from their perspective, completely in their own words, which is very American Valley Girl sort of language. But it's almost like Mona Awad is doing on purpose to kind of take the piss out of them as well a little bit. I really enjoyed this. I thought this was so fun. It was such a quick read. The only thing about it, unfortunately, that didn't really work for me, other than that it probably didn't need to be as long as it is. This is significantly longer than Bunny. And that is because whilst we are going over some of the same events in Bunny, we are expanding a lot, and I really enjoyed seeing the bunnies' perspectives and actually getting to know them as people and their own kind of thoughts throughout what was happening. But we also see another perspective in this book, who I will just call the creation, and we see things from his perspective. And that didn't really work as well for me, I think. I thought there were some interesting linguistic choices done with that. And I did overall like the narrative that we got through the creation, but I also felt it was really drawn out and overlong and could really have been shortened. And I was kind of just like, when I was in his perspective, even though I did find it interesting, just kind of wanted to be back with the bunnies, unfortunately. But yeah, this is a hilarious book. Definitely does go more into the horror, I think, than the first book did, and as I said, much more queer, which I adore. So yeah, overall I think I'm giving this a mid-4. It isn't the 5-star that Bunny was for me. I wish it could have been a 5-star, but I do just think that other perspective really kind of dragged the pacing of the book down a bit and made it lag a little bit. But otherwise, I really enjoyed this as a sequel, and I do think it is a worthy sequel to Bunny. I think if you like the kind of wry humour and the poking fun that the first Bunny book does, and you're fully here to be inside these unhinged girls' brains, you could have a good time with this book like I did. So yeah, that is my thoughts on We Love You, Bunny. Hello, so I figured I should give an update because I've started the Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. I am about 100 pages or so into this, so like a quarter of the way in, not really far. I'm finding this hard to read. I'm not really getting into it, and I'm finding it not particularly readable, which is not the case from when I read My Heart as a Chainsaw recently. We're kind of in this like double narrative, well, technically a triple narrative structure going on. At the very start, we are following a female academic who's trying to get tenure. She's just basically found this old historical document, which is like her great-great-great-grandfather or something, writing about his time when he was a reverend, and he is being told a narrative by a Native American man who is essentially talking to him about things he's experienced, including his encounter with a vampire, although at this point he doesn't really know it's a vampire. We kind of know going into this book that it's a vampire story, but I'm just kind of finding it a little bit hard to get into. It's very old style writing because that is the time era. We're in like 1918 or something, 1912, sorry, when we are following Arthur Burkhorn, who is the Lutheran pastor. It's actually our main character's, who's called Etsy, it's her grandfather, and yeah, he is listening to the story of a Native American called Good Stab. And we're also getting a lot of traditional Native American Indigenous dialogue, which is partly being explained to us and translated of sorts by Arthur, but not always. So it is kind of having to figure it out as you go along. It is not bad, do not get me wrong. I do like it, but I'm not immersed and I'm not loving it, which I'm really sad about because I really was hoping that I was going to love this one. Jury's still out because I may start getting much more into this as we get further in. I'm still only a quarter, but I am kind of rereading this really slowly. The chapters are not short either, so it does kind of feel like a bit of an undertaking reading this one. As I said, not bad, but a difficult read, and I am probably going to be picking up other stuff to read alongside this because it's kind of heavy. Also, by the way, extremely cool end papers here. So, I may have said, but I ended up actually completely switching to the audiobook for the Buffalo Hunter because I was just kind of struggling to want to pick this up. Now, do not get me wrong, this is not a bad book. I just didn't think it worked for me personally. I just wasn't very immersed in it, unfortunately. And I think there's some really cool things in here. I like the sort of whatever it's called, narrative, where it's a story within a story and people are learning the stories. And I thought the characters were interesting, but I don't think I really connected with them, unfortunately. The writing was good because, of course, it's Stephen Graham Jones. But it just didn't work for me, unfortunately, which I'm really sad about because I really wanted this to work for me. I do think there's some really cool vampire lore in this. I really like what Stephen Graham Jones did with the vampire lore. There are some distinct differences from other vampire lore out there, and the Native American perspective I thought was really nice to see as well. But I just kind of found this book to be really slow paced. And as I said, it just didn't grip me, unfortunately. I'm giving it a high 3, I think. I was kind of like considering giving a low 4 just because objectively I think it's good. But I was just kind of bored for a lot of this book, unfortunately, so I just don't think I can give it a 4. You know, I really hope this does work for other people out there. I know it has worked for other people out there, but I think, unfortunately, it is just a mixed one for me. One I would maybe go back to and try it again at a later point and see if it does work for me again in the future, but at least on this rendition of it, it just didn't quite hit me. I do think the audiobook was good. There's different narrators depending on which character it is that's telling the story. But yeah, overall, just a little bit of a miss for me. I'm sad because I really enjoyed My Heart is a Chainsaw that I read earlier this year by him, and I would still read more books by him, definitely. Just this one wasn't quite what I wanted it to be, unfortunately. So I am finally reading my first ever Darcy Coates book. I didn't expect it to be for this challenge. She's honestly not an author that I think I've ever been drawn to picking up from before, but I've definitely heard of her before, talked about in horror circles. Very much in the case of I'll get around to her at some point, I'm sure. Didn't expect it to be for this challenge. She came out with a book this year, How Bad Things Can Get. I also actually assumed she was a thriller writer, which this book does lean thriller-wise in terms of its subgenre, but it is also definitely horror. And I actually had the best time with this book. Is it the most thought-provoking, serious, terrifying horror of the ones in this category? No. It isn't, but it's good, fun popcorn horror. This really did kind of feel like I was watching a movie whilst I was reading it. It's quick-paced. There's characters that we are given just enough of, I think, to be able to empathise with them and be able to see where the story could potentially go, but also I think they're likeable enough, which I was kind of surprised about. We're mostly seeing things through 3 different character perspectives. Our main character, who is called Ruth, who we learn very much from the beginning is the only survivor of a cult where everyone else died, and she is kind of living that secret, but she's still very much traumatized by it. We're also seeing things from the perspective of a journalist who is trying to uncover certain mysteries, and we're seeing things from the perspective of this woman called Petra, who is the lead assistant of this big influencer guy. And that is where the story starts off, really, because this story is about this influencer guy whose name I've actually completely forgotten. He's in it, but he's not in it a massive amount, I would say. Enough to give him a character. But yeah, basically he's an influencer. He does like videos and stuff, and he invites a whole bunch of his followers and some celebrities and stuff to this remote island in the middle of nowhere for a couple of days to kind of play games, win money, big publicity stunt, that kind of thing. So Ruth ends up going to this island along with the journalist on his own for his own reasons, with a group of friends, and right away things are not right. And she can tell things are not right, and yeah, it kind of escalates from there. And I really don't want to say much about the plot of this one because it really did just kind of unveil itself really well. This is very speedily told. It's very quick. I read this really fast. And I just thought it was a really fun ride, to be honest. And I actually really enjoy the characters. I've kind of gotten into cult books lately, so I liked that this is also kind of a cult book. And I had a really good time with it. I would definitely check out more from Darcy Coates now, I think. I'm giving this a low to mid 4. I haven't quite decided yet. I'm gonna let the fun of me just finishing it settle for a bit before I decide on my final rating. I feel like objectively it's more of a low 4, but I had so much fun with it. It feels like a mid 4 to me at the moment, but I also kind of feel like because it is more thriller vibes, it's also not something that's going to really stick in my memory. But it is one I would actually reread because I thought it was just really fun and I did like the characters in the story. And yeah, I'm definitely going to check out more by Darcy Coates in the future now. I'm really happy I finally read something by her. I had really no expectations going into this book other than that I kind of thought it was going to be fun, and it definitely did deliver on that. But I also thought it was really well crafted in terms of the plot, the narrative, the pacing, and the characters. So yeah, a success for me. We'll definitely read more by Darcy Coates in the future. So, it's happened. I have finally finished the last book for this challenge. My gosh, this has been an undertaking. But this was actually such a good one to end on. This is Breathe In, Bleed Out by Brian Macaulay. An author I have actually heard of before but haven't read from. I know he wrote the Candy Cane Kills, which is a campy Christmas horror book. I saw that going around last year and was kind of interested in it, but I hadn't actually read him before until now. And this was honestly such a fun way to finish this project off. I really, really enjoyed this. It really is just quintessential popcorn campy horror. It's a slasher book, very much echoing the steps of previous slasher movies, other slasher books. It was just a really fun ride. Was it, again, the best book ever? No. But I had a really good time whilst I was reading it. It was a super easy read. Much with the Darcy Coates book I just read, there is just enough given about the characters to be able to empathise with them. We're actually following our main character here, Hannah, who is struggling with grief after the sudden death of her fiance, and essentially at the start of this book she's really struggling with that grief. It's affecting her life and she's starting to see hallucinations of him everywhere because she feels survivor's guilt about the death. And her best friend Tess shows up and is like, right, we're all going away on this wellness retreat weekend because we haven't seen you in ages and we want to do this for you. So it is her, Tess, and a couple of other old college friends that all used to be very close, and she's kind of lost contact with them. But when they get to the wellness retreat, things start to go weird and people start to go missing, and Hannah is sure there is something culty and off going on at this wellness retreat that's being run by this man called Guru Pax. And yeah, I definitely saw a lot of what happened coming, to be honest, in this book, but I didn't actually see the final twist reveal. I was surprised by that, which I enjoyed. And overall, I just thought this was really fun. It's a book that I think is very self-aware of what it's trying to do, and I think a lot of the characters in here are also very self-aware. I did think, however, that sometimes it was a little too on the nose with what he was trying to do, and I think that is perhaps why I'm going to give this a low 4 rather than a mid 4 like the Darcy Coates book got, because I think that was just a little bit smarter, and this was very much playing some of the same tropes that you're used to seeing, and it was a little on the nose at times with what it was saying, but overall I actually really had a good time with this one, and I'll definitely check out more stuff by this author, I think, going ahead. Yeah, that is it. That is all of the books read. I'm now going to talk to you about some stats and diversity stuff that I noticed whilst I was doing this challenge, before we go on to the final ranking of what I think was the worst books to the best books. I actually want to just go over a couple of interesting stats and stuff. Sounds boring, I know, but I'm sorry, I'm a stats nerd. About the books from reading them that I thought was interesting, some of it is diversity based and some of it is based on the themes that were most prevalent throughout all these books, which is quite funny. 20 books. There was a shocking similarity in some of the themes, which I think was really interesting. But we'll go with the diversity stats first, because I always think this is really interesting, just to kind of see exactly what's going on in the horror category. As you've probably seen from my reactions to the Goodreads Awards, they're not very good at being diverse. It's pretty much all white people, heterosexual, that kind of thing. But horror category isn't too bad, actually. So let me go through it all with you now. So looking at the gender of the authors, so obviously 20 authors in the category, 9 of the 10 authors are presumed female. I can't specify exactly for some of these people because some of them identify only as queer, and I don't know if that necessarily means they have a trans identity or not, but presumed female. 10 of the authors were male. 1 author has self-defined as gender fluid, Chuck Tingle, which is, yeah, a pretty even spread actually of gender between them all, which is yeah, pretty interesting. In terms of BIPOC writers, we have 2 Mexican authors with Sylvia Marina Garcia and Isabel Cañas, 3 Asian authors, that being Catherine Dang, Ling Ling Kwong, and Kylie Lee Baker, who are respectively Vietnamese, Taiwanese, and Kylie Lee Baker is like a mix of Japanese, Chinese, Irish, but yeah, a good mix of Asian identities in the awards. 1 Indigenous author with Stephen Grain Jones, 1 Dutch author with Johanna van Veen, 1 Australian author, Darcy Coates, 2 white British authors who are Lucy Rose and Kat Dunn, and finally the rest are just white American authors. So Nat Cassidy, Chuck Tingle, Grady Hendrix, Stephen King, Rachel Harrison, Keith Rossen, Andrew Joseph White. So in terms of LGBT representation, I looked at both the authors and in the books themselves. So there isn't a whole lot in terms of information out there necessarily about which authors fall within the LGBT spectrum. Not everyone wants to publicize those details, so if I don't mention them, they just haven't, essentially. Presumed straight but don't know, basically. We have 1 outwardly trans author who is Andrew Joseph White, a trans man. We have 1 bisexual gender fluid author, Chuck Tingle, and we have 4 queer authors who I presume are lesbian based on their outward presenting gender identity, but they've all kind of said that they are queer, whether that means lesbian, bisexual, asexual, pansexual, the whole spectrum there. But those authors are Kat Dunn, Ling Ling Kwong, Lucy Rose, and Johanna van Veen. And in terms of queer representation in the books themselves, there was actually quite a lot, which, as I said, so nice to see this in one of the Goodreads categories. So sapphic representation, we had the main relationship in The Lamb, although I believe the main protagonist's mother in The Lamb is actually bisexual, not specifically lesbian, but there was a sapphic relationship as the central focus point. Again, sapphic relationships in Blood on Her Tongue, The Bewitching, and Hungerstone. In terms of gay, Achillean, relationships. We had a couple of side characters in some of the books. So Possession of Alba Diaz had a side character. Lucky Day, the other main character in it, was gay. We Love You Bunny, one of the perspectives was explicitly gay. And in Coffin Moon, the main antagonist and a side character were both gay, and that sexuality was not demonized in the book either, which I figured I should mention. In terms of bisexual representation, the main protagonist of Play Nice is bisexual, I believe. Obviously, the mother character in The Lamb. I would also say as well, the main protagonist in The Lamb, although she's a young girl, does seem to develop romantic feelings for another girl, so kind of putting her in the sapphic category as well. Lucky Day protagonist is bisexual. The book actually deals with biphobia in the book itself, and We Love You Bunny, the bunnies are pretty much explicitly stated in this book that they are bisexual. No poly representation that I could really see, although We Love You Bunny definitely could go down that path. And in terms of asexual representation, it's more hinting that I saw than anything explicit, but I would say Mathilde's character in Immaculate Conception could be seen as asexual. She basically uses science to get pregnant because she doesn't want a man involved, and also hinted at in the Bewitching with a side character. Also, sorry, I forgot to mention, but there's also sapphic side representation in Breathe In, Bleed Out as well, because the main character's best friend is a lesbian, I believe. And then trans representation, not a lot of that, unfortunately. Obviously, You Weren't Meant to Be Human, trans author, trans main character. And I would say in Never Flinch, technically, you could sort of see a gender fluid, split personality kind of thing going on, but as you know, I was not keen on how that was shown in the book. And then in terms of disability and neurodiversity, there wasn't really a lot of disability to be seen in these books, to be honest. There was some chronic pain representation in Hungerstone, although that didn't necessarily turn out to be exactly what it was later in the book, but I appreciated it was there for a while at least, and it was dealt with seriously. And we have two autistic authors in the category of Andrew Joseph White and Lucy Rose. Andrew Joseph White's book also having an autistic protagonist like himself. So in terms of the themes across the book, this is what I found really interesting. Out of the 20 books, I think 7 of them were historical, which is quite impressive. So some of them centering in the same time period as well. So we had the 1700s with the possession of Alba Diaz. We had the 19th century represented by Hungerstone, Blood on Her Tongue, The Bewitching, and The Buffalo Hunter. Quite funny that 3 of the vampire books are, of course, in the 19th century. In the 1970s, we had Coffin Moon and Witchcraft for Wayward Girls. And then there was also just books that tended to go back and forth between the past and modern day in their narratives. The Bewitching, Buffalo Hunter, We Love You Bunny, Immaculate Conception, Play Nice, Coffin Moon, The Haunting of Paynes Hollow, and How Bad Things Can Get. Also a little bit in Breathe In, Bleed Out as well. In terms of other themes that we saw, 2 books were actually set in or around the pandemic, Bat Eater and Never Flinch. 2 books were set in a near future, Immaculate Conception and Lucky Day. Interestingly, also, those were ones that I really did feel the sci-fi was heavier than the horror. And then into the main themes of the books themselves. So, what did we see a lot of in these books, repeated across the books? Female autonomy was a really big one. Still a very sort of relevant theme in today's society, obviously. We saw it in The Bewitching, Blood on Her Tongue, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, The Possession of Alba Diaz, What Hunger, Hungerstone, and in Never Flinch. Female rage, also very much a theme, included also in a lot of other 2025 horror releases that didn't make it into this category. We definitely also saw it in Blood on Her Tongue, What Hunger, Bat Eater, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, We Love You Bunny, Coffin Moon, and Hungerstone. Cannibalism, also a big theme at the moment apparently in horror. It was in The Lamb, Blood on Her Tongue, What Hunger, Hungerstone, and I believe it was in You Weren't Meant to Be Human, because I saw that in the trigger warnings. I just didn't get far enough to know. We had 4 vampire books in the category Coffin Moon, Blood on Her Tongue, The Buffalo Hunter, and Hungerstone. And we had 5 books that had some form of witchcraft in the books as well. So obviously The Bewitching, Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, The Possession of Alba Diaz. I will say Witchcraft for that one because I genuinely do believe that the main male protagonist in that book kind of had witchcraft powers. It was a science versus magic kind of thing, but it plays him off a little bit witchy. Also, witchcraft is in We Love You Bunny, of course, and The Haunting of Paynes Hollow, in terms of the old-timey curse that was around. Another major theme we saw in basically all the books, except 3 of them, is family trauma. Really big deal in all of these books. I think the only books where it wasn't a central theme, and by that I mean it still kind of was a little bit in there, but it just wasn't what I consider a central theme of the book, were Immaculate Conception, Possession of Alba Diaz, and The Buffalo Hunter. I think all the rest heavily delved into family trauma in their books. And Breathe and Bleed Out as well, I don't think that had very much in it too, but there was definitely trauma as a central point in that book. It just wasn't necessarily related to a family member. And then lastly, we did have a couple of books that dealt specifically with the topic of racism. Bat Eater, What Hunger, The Buffalo Hunter, to name them. There may have been a couple I missed as well from that, but those are the ones that really stick out for me. So yeah, I just thought that was really interesting, the different kind of similarities we've got through all 20 of these books. Hope you found it interesting as well. So without further ado, let me go into ranking all 20 books and seeing which I think is the worst and which is the best. Okay, so here we have the good old tier ranker, and I've put on all 20 of the books down here. And of course, I've decided to go horror themed for the actual categories. So right down at the bottom, we have Resurrection. These are for the books that I want to go back to at a later point and give them another chance to see if they work for me the second time around. This is probably going to mostly be the ones that I softy enough, to be honest, because they weren't right for me right now. But hopefully they will have their day. Then we have, in the immortal words of Drag Queen 4G4, ugh, Jesus, gross. But these are the books I hated. I really didn't like these. They didn't work for me. Then we have Ghost Train. This is... it's going somewhere, but I'm not seated. In fact, I don't know if anyone is seated. So that is that category. Then we have Popcorn Horror. These are just the books I had fun with. Are they the best thing ever? Maybe not. Are they going to exist in my memory that long after this project? Maybe not, but I really enjoyed them. And then just before the highest rank we have Final Girl Vibes. These are the books that almost made it to being a favourite, just missed out on something maybe. And then finally at the very top we have Died and Gone to Heaven. These are the books that just really worked for me, and they are my favourite books that I read in this challenge. So let's go through them one by one. This has put them in just a random order, so it's not in the order I read them in like it is in the video, but we're starting off with Grady Hendrix, A Witchcraft for Wayward Girls, and I think this is Final Girl vibes. This was really close to a 5-star for me. It may become a 5-star on a later reread, but it didn't quite just hit the caliber of some of the other 5-stars that I had, some of the other books that I read in this challenge, and it still is not my favourite Grady Hendrix book. That still goes to The Exorcism, my best friend's exorcism. Next we have When the Wolf Comes Home by Nat Cassidy. Also going to put this in Final Girl vibes. I really enjoyed it. I just didn't necessarily entirely love the conclusion. And yeah, it just wasn't quite a 5 for me. Then we have Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. This is going to be the first one in the Ghost Train, unfortunately. A book that really should have worked for me on paper. Just didn't. I just wasn't a fan of this one, unfortunately. Our first Died and Gone to Heaven, however, is Blood on Her Tongue. Adored this book. I did actually vote for this in my initial first voting round, for the Goodreads Award, and I really enjoyed this book. It wasn't exactly what I thought it was going in, and that actually made it better. Then we have Buffalo Hunter. This is sadly also going to go into Ghost Train. It could potentially go into Resurrection, I think, because I may try this one again, but this is just one that unfortunately didn't really work for me. I really wanted it to. I'm really sad it didn't, but it just passed me by, but I could see it working for other people. Then we have The Lamb. This, of course, is going right up to the top of Died and Gone to Heaven. This is my favourite book I read in this video. My final vote in the Goodreads horror category. Chuck Tingle, Lucky Day. I think this could almost go into Ghost Train, but I think I'm going to put it into popcorn horror. Having read actually a whole bunch of other popcorn horror books in this video, I think I would put it here. I didn't have a bad time with this. It just didn't really leave a massive impression on me and wasn't as good as the previous Chuck Tingle book I'd read, but it was still decent, so I think it belongs here. Then Immaculate Conception, that is also going up into Died and Gone to Heaven. I think I would actually swap Blood on Her Tongue, so this would be second place for me. I think it just really worked for me and I loved it, even though I still don't think it's really horror. Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zhang. This is going into Final Girl vibes at the bottom of it, unfortunately, and that's purely because I found this book too heavy emotionally and a bit too depressing, but I still think it's brilliant. It just wasn't one that really worked necessarily for me, but I can tell it was still a good book. What Hunger? This one also goes into Final Girl vibes, I think. In fact, we're going to swap these two around because I did have a better time with What Hunger than I did with Bat Eater and Other Names for Cora Zhang, to be honest. The Bewitching is our first Resurrection, and while we're here, let's just put the other Resurrection in there as well. These are obviously the two books that I didn't actually read in this video, but I definitely do want to go back to them, and what I did read of the books I was really liking, so definitely two I will come back to. How Bad Things Can Get. Oh, this is a tough one. I'm going to put this at the very top, I think, of popcorn horror. It actually almost could go into Final Girl vibes. I rated this a mid-4, but I do think it's going to be one that is a little bit forgettable, unfortunately, so I am going to keep it here. Then We Love You Bunny is also going to go into Final Girl vibes. I think I'm going to put it here next, between What Hunger and Bat Eater. This was just so fun. I laughed so much with this book. I think it just overstayed its welcome, I think, and was a bit repetitive, and that's why it didn't hit that 5-star. Bleed In, Breed Out. Breathe In, Bleed Out, sorry. Popcorn horror, again, putting this just above Chuck Tingle because I had a much more fun time with it, to be honest, than I did with Lucky Day, but not quite as good as How Bad Things Can Get. Then Possession of Alba Diaz. This is going into Final Girl vibes, actually. I think here is where it belongs. Yeah, that looks good to me. Stephen King. Yep. It's going into, Jesus, gross. Hated it. Didn't hate it as much as Holly, I'll give it that much, but I did not have a good time reading this. I'm officially done with the Holly series now. Then we have, in fact I realised, let's swap these two around because Buffalo Hunter should be right at the top of this because it's nowhere near as bad as Hungerstone. Haunting of Paynes Hollow, right at the bottom of Ghost Train. I almost want to put it into Jesus Grasp, but it was an easy listen. It was completely forgettable. I don't think it had a very good story, to be honest, but the characters were fine, and I did have a decent time with the audiobook. I just didn't think it was anywhere that good, but it's not on this level of badness. Then we have Coffin Moon. Ooh, I'm not quite sure about this one. I think we're going to go with popcorn horror with it, and we're going to put it above Lucky Day because I did like it. It just wasn't completely for me, and I didn't get super immersed into it. And the final book we have is Play Nice by Rachel Harrison, and I think justifiably so. This is going to go right here into popcorn horror. And yeah, that is the final ranking. I'm pretty happy with that. And honestly, this is a pretty stacked categories up here. I actually really enjoyed a lot of these books, which is really nice. And these books, even the ones that I'm saying are on the ghost train, I didn't hate. They just didn't really work for me, or I didn't think they were like the best written or the best plot. That is it. That is the complete ranking of my worst books to best books. So that is it from me. I hope you found this video informative and interesting. It's definitely been a massive project. I don't expect to do this again. Maybe one year when I'm feeling crazy enough, I will. But it was a really big undertaking to try and read all 20 of these books, particularly when I didn't predict them all right to begin with, so I had to catch up reading. But I actually really enjoyed this experience. Like, I can say I didn't hate any of these books except one. This one. It knows what it did to me. But, like, even if I didn't love all of these books, I kind of had a good time with all of them, which was really nice. So I really enjoyed doing this. I will be doing a follow-up video, hopefully coming up out sometime in December, where I'm going to talk about some of the books that didn't make it into the Goodreads Awards, other 2025 horror releases. So I have some books that I've already read for that, and I might try and read one or two more just to go into that video, but that will be an extra little addendum to this video basically, because I feel like I still want to talk about them, and I've already filmed stuff about it, so I may as well just make a video about it. Let me know down below which of these horror books I've made you want to read, which have I turned you off from reading. What was your pick in the Goodreads Choice Awards for best horror? Really intrigued to know. As you know, my pick is The Lamb. That is my favourite book, but I got 3 5 stars throughout reading all 20 of these books, which is pretty good, honestly. So until next time, stay safe, stay cozy, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!